Hello guys, welcome to my channel Lucid Fanfic, and if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. So be sure to stick around until the end. And let's get started. Being an introvert certainly had its ups and downs. For example, whenever talking to anyone, he was incapable of maintaining eye contact. What was the significance? Well, Izuku was still working on finding that particular answer. However, he hadn't given up on finding it yet. On the plus side, though, people usually tended to avoid contact with him. Now, some would think that self-isolation and negative human contact could harm a child's development. There were even thousands of case studies on this particular subject. Cases that Izuku had memorized from front to back. Hundreds upon hundreds of articles specifically dedicated to that area of expertise. Whole walls of text and jargon that had once flown directly over his young head, but that wasn't the important part. What was important was the knowledge that each case study had provided. An introverted child tended to be more shy and soft-spoken, often anxious more so than not, and nervous. Most of these particular children, at a rather young age and even into their late teens, lacked self-confidence and struggled to make meaningful bonds with other children their age. In social environments, they struggled with most issues found extremely common in regards to being a child. However, Izuku was not the same. Anxious? Oh, absolutely. Lack of self-confidence? Well, that, not so much. Burn! He roared manically, cackling loudly as streams of fire jettisoned through the palms of his hands, catching nearly a dozen or so robots in their wake. The red-hot flames seemed to bend to Izuku's will, rapidly changing directions to cover a wider area while targeting robots with lethal precision. For you see, Izuku may have been a shy and nervous child when growing up with his single mother, one who was more anxious than even he was, but when it came to utilizing his quirk. Burn! Haha! The green-haired teen cackled, flames pouring out of both of his palms to melt all of the 1, 2, and 3-pointers in his path. The young teen spun on the balls of his heels while stretching his arms out wide. The streams of fire vacating his hands proceeded to expand, lurching powerfully before practically combusting. A detonation of fire cannonied from his position, absolute, eviscerating all of the robots that had cornered him. Well, some would say that Izuku was a bit manic in that regard. That is Izuku Midoriya. A hybrid animal spoke, eyes gleaming in satisfaction at the disturbed looks in his faculty's eyes. Seems a bit a man with a cowboy hat and face mask spoke slowly. Excited, he settled on, leaning back in his chair and watching the young teen blaze through all of his robot opponents. He's making me excited. A beautiful woman with dark purple hair commented with a dirty smirk, eyes watching the chaos unfold with a twinkle in her blue eyes. I do love a bit of fire. A groan emanated right beside her, courtesy of a sleepy-looking man who looked more like a homeless person than an actual hero. This kid's already giving me a headache. Ah, Shota-kun. The previous woman spoke, nudging her fellow teacher with her elbow. He doesn't remind you of someone? Her eyebrows rose suggestively at her question, which the man ignored. Aizawa wouldn't entertain Namuri. She was a menace to society, well, at least to societal norms. She wasn't a villain, but she was definitely a menace to society. That wasn't up for debate, and no, he wouldn't be explaining himself. Kid's got a flashy quirk, that's for sure. A gruff voice spoke from beside Namuri. Seems he has full control of those flames of his. The buff man tilted his head as he watched the boy perform extremely complex acrobatics while maintaining a constant flow of flames and fire. He's no slouch. Kid definitely has prior training. What are they feeding him these days? The animal hybrid who could talk giggled quietly to itself, eyes returning to the spectacle that was Izuku Midoriya. Yes, Midoriya-kun is a very interesting child. What's more interesting is his completely average test scores and prior schooling. From both this exam and that of his previous school, he was a child who neither excelled in school, nor did he struggle either. He was relatively forgetful, according to testament from faculty, staff, and hearsay of his classmates. Principal Nizu's words silenced some of the various chatter from the faculty of High School. The talking animal gestured to a separate screen, showing what appeared to be a portfolio of Midoriya. It possessed everything from his academic scores, his preferred lunch foods, and even a bit of his home life. This is quite Aizawa paused for a moment, feeling incredibly tired already. Quite the portfolio, Nizu, but I take it there's more to it than this. Principal Nizu chuckled quietly as he watched Midoriya start to take flight with his flames, blazing through the makeshift city and raining fire down upon the robots, while simultaneously helping and aiding his fellow students whenever they needed it. Midoriya-kun is an interesting child, wouldn't you say? Nizu took great pleasure in watching the varying degrees of shock from his staff. He knew how it looked. Midoriya seemed to resemble a pro-hero with ease despite still only being a child. Make sure to keep an eye on him. With those parting words, Nizu clicked a button on a remote switch. The makeshift cities they prepared for the exams began to shake and rumble as several zero-pointers were released for the students to either attack or flee from. Show me what you can do, Midoriya-kun. Nizu spoke with a simple smile, beady little eyes glinting dangerously. He was having the time of his life. He wouldn't deny it either. This day was slowly becoming one of the best days in his entire life. As if it was really difficult to top his rather boring and plain life. But that didn't matter. What did matter was the fact that he was free to use his quirk. His flames licked dangerously at the edge of his palms, practically begging to be used and released upon the world. Izuku had always been a quiet person. He never made trouble with other children and tended to keep to himself. Katsuki Bakugo notwithstanding, of course. His childhood bully had always been an annoying constant in his life. They hated each other with a passion and with their rather powerful quirks, had never seen eye to eye growing up. Bakugo would torment him daily, and Izuku would refrain from burning the boy alive. It was a tiring cycle, one that Izuku had been tired of upon reaching middle school. He'd taken to start fighting back against Bakugo. It often netted him with scorch marks and ruined clothing, but it wasn't like Bakugo wouldn't suffer. The occasional burns himself. While he and Bakugo may have hated each other's guts, there was no denying the fact that they both pushed each other to the extremes. Whether that be physically, mentally, or quirk ly not a word, yes he knew. But at the end of the day, they both wanted to be heroes. One day, though, they have to settle this rivalry of theirs. Izuku was actually looking forward to the day where he would humble the explosive quirk user. Wiping that smug grin off his stupid-looking face would be cathartic. But that was in the future and right now. Why is the ground shaking? Some random examinee questioned in panic, struggling to stay standing as the city trembled ferociously. Izuku cast his gaze to the south, eyes widening upon noticing the incredibly giant zero-pointer that was slowly lumbering towards them. Well, that was a big robot. And for what? Yudata High must have been absolutely loaded. This was ridiculous, even for the most prestigious hero school in all of Japan. Knowing that the zero-pointer was more or less just a glorified obstacle, Izuku took off in the opposite direction while yelling out towards his fellow examinees. Move! It isn't worth it! The green-haired teen blasted a wave of flames in the air, gathering the attention of other participants. Retreat to the northern gate. After the boy's words, the dozen or so teens began to take off towards the northern gate, utilizing their quirks as they did. Izuku's eyes scanned the area, making sure that everyone was retreating. He nodded in satisfaction before placing his palms down, ejecting a stream of flames that slowly lifted him off the ground. He made to retreat after his fellow participants before hearing a pained cry. Green eyes widened in shock upon noticing a girl with long, ebony hair trapped beneath a bit of cement. A section of the girl's arm glowed a brilliant pink before a crowbar slipped out of her arm. The girl placed the crowbar under the rubble before trying to lift the heavy cement off her legs. Sweat cascaded down her rather beautiful face as she struggled to even lift the heavy piece of rubble. Izuku saw the panic in her eyes, and before he could stop himself, his flames grew in intensity, detonating from the palms of his hands and carrying him to the girl's position a second later. The boy skid to a stop near the girl, knees scraping along the concrete painfully. He ignored the slight pain and immediately gripped onto the concrete, near the girl's legs. His muscles flexed, and a moment later the cement seemed to be slowly lifting. Gritting his teeth, the boy spoke as he struggled to lift the object. "Crowbar." He grunted heavily, slowly but ever so surely managing to pry the item upwards, allowing the girl to use the crowbar and aiding him in his endeavor. Izuku's arms flexed painfully, and he felt something tear in his biceps. A hiss of pain filtered through his teeth, but he didn't stop in his actions. If anything, the sudden boost of adrenaline only gave him more strength to accomplish his task. A moment later, the large piece of rubble was lifted off the girl's legs, allowing her to scoot away. She immediately made to stand before crying out in pain and dropping to her hands and knees. "My ankle." The girl grunted painfully. "I can't walk." She felt a pair of hands wrap around her body before being hoisted up a moment later. She was only slightly embarrassed at the quiet yelp of surprise that fluttered out her lips. "What are you doing?" The long-haired teen questioned in a flustered manner. "Saving you," Izuku replied plainly. Their conversation was interrupted not a moment later as the zero-pointer stood directly above them, foot in course to crash down upon them. Izuku heard the girl scream out in fear. It was muffled to him, though. The world seemed to slow down as vital fluid pounded through his ears. Instinct had him raising his hand toward the sky, hand shifting and contorting to resemble a gun. His index finger pointed directly towards the large metal foot that was about to crush them. Izuku called upon the power of his quirk not a second later. Liquid fire shot through his entire body, leaving him feeling itchy as a small burst of fire exploded out from his index finger. The young girl in his arms spluttered at the display and lack of flames. She very nearly screamed in terror before being forced to shut her eyes and bow her head as an immense wave of heat emanated from the boy's hand. If any of his fellow participants in the exam had believed his flames were crazy and over the top before then, their jaws would have dropped at this display. From the tip of his finger, a veritable sea of flames shot through the digit, expanding out as far as the eye could see and rocketing towards the foot of the zero-pointer. The red-hot flames only grew in size before practically engulfing the entire robot. First went the foot, then the legs. The flames seemed to almost caress the giant robot, wrapping around its body with complex loops and bounces. The fire then seemed to glow brighter before abruptly combusting a moment later, causing an incredibly large shockwave to shoot out from the explosion. Izuku closed his eyes at the shockwave, cradling the pretty girl in his arms while withstanding the immense heat and powerful shockwave. A few seconds passed by in silence before Izuku slowly peeked an eye open. His eyes widened not a moment later as he stared up into the darkening sky. It wasn't hard to see why. His flames had practically vaporized the gigantic robot. A blanket of ash covered the sky, slowly raining down and covering the entire exam area. The destruction was beautiful in a somewhat twisted way. The surrounding area that Izuku had been in was reduced to nothing but charred earth. No discernible details to identify what had been, at first, a normal-looking street. The adrenaline in Izuku's body finally began to leave, causing a wave of nausea to assault his body. He dropped to a knee, grunting in pain as the scrape marks from earlier made themselves known. "You saved me." Izuku creaked an eye open, finally getting a decent look at the admittedly pretty girl. His cheeks painted a cherubic red as he stared into her charcoal eyes. Her long, spiky hair covered a portion of her face as she stared directly at him. He stammered for a moment, only just now noticing how he was holding the girl. It was rather close, and it didn't help that the girl had rather noticeable curves to her. Well, this was a first. He'd never really talked to girls his age, considering he preferred to be alone. Well, that and the fact that he was ridiculously shy, pretty women at that, made him nauseous. And this girl was gorgeous. He managed to eloquently speak. The young girl in his arms furrowed her eyebrows in confusion. She just started at his reddening face before a beautiful smile painted her features. "Thank you for saving me, huh?" She fished for a name, staring at the boy with a soft smile. Izuku was mute for a moment before blinking rapidly at the unasked question. "Oh, I Izuku Midoriya. Nice to meet you." He replied in a rapid manner, voice slightly squeaking due to his nerves. The girl, instead of being weirded out, only giggled cutely. "It's nice to meet you, Midoriya-san. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu." She bobbed her head for a moment before glancing towards the northern gate, noticing a rather large crowd of people making their towards them. "Well, we should probably get going, huh?" Izuku only nodded dumbly before adjusting his grip on the pretty girl. He ignored the atomic blush, painting his face before idly stumbling his way towards the large crowd. Everything after that was relatively a blur to Izuku. He remembered handing the pretty girl over to Recovery Girl, so cool, before the woman scolded him. He hadn't realized why at first, before the older woman had pointed out at the fact that he tore several of the muscles in his biceps, trying to save Yaoyorozu-san. That had been a surprise, but once it had been pointed out, his arms practically screamed at him. That had been relatively painful, but after a simple kiss from the older woman, he had been relatively fine afterwards, if not a bit tired. The train ride home had been a jumbled mess, and he didn't really remember anything after that. His thoughts had been on the pretty girl he had saved. For some reason, she seemed extremely familiar. Where had he heard that name before? Could she have been from that Yaoyorozu family? The incredibly wealthy and politically powerful Yaoyorozu family that headed Yaoyorozu Incorporated? A small world. Izuku walked into his home, eyes glancing down at the phone in his hand, researching about the Yaoyorozu family. He idly closed the various tabs and articles regarding the family before greeting his mother. "Mom, I'm home." Surprise. He wasn't ashamed to admit that he screamed. However, he was ashamed at the fact that it sounded like a little girl screaming. That was terrible. Green eyes widened in shock, and Izuku was caught off guard at the large banner set up in the living room. The giant letters spelled out congratulations on passing. There was various balloons and other minor things needed for a surprise party. His eyes left the decorations not a moment later before settling on his mother's smiling face. The petite woman was hopping up and down, holding a small cake that was, unsurprisingly, All Might-themed. A soft smile came to his face, and he resisted the urge to cry at the simple display of love from his mother. "What is all this?" he instead asked, slowly walking farther into the room. Inko Midoriya pouted at the question, holding the cake up with one hand while placing the other on her hip, slender figure curving at the action. "A party, duh," she replied with a smile. "I go through all of this trouble, where's my hug?" Izuku chuckled at his mother's words before running into her arms, causing a quiet oof to emanate from the woman's lips. He squeezed her tightly, speaking softly. "Thank you. That's what I thought." The shorter woman responded with a smile, returning the boy's hug as best as she could while balancing the cake in her offhand. "So, tell me all about it. How did it go? Did you pass?" Izuku pulled away from his mother with a soft smile before idly taking the cake in her hand. He placed the item on the table before taking her hand and guiding her to the sofa. And they talked. Izuku explained everything that had happened. How the test had gone, how he met various pro-heroes, and even how he had saved Yaoyorozu-san. His mother had proceeded to then relentlessly tease him about the girl, asking if she was pretty and if he was interested in her, etc. His mother could be an absolute handful. "So, do you think you passed?" the slender woman asked with a smile as she dug into the cake she bought. Izuku swallowed his portion before smiling. "Maybe." Inko rolled her eyes at her son's words. "Now's not the time for jokes, Izuku. Come on," she whined in a childish manner, poking the boy with her fork. "Tell me." The normally shy and anxious boy only smiled at his mother, idly eating his portion of the delicious. "It's a mystery, Ma. Wouldn't want to ruin the surprise." The green-haired woman only groaned loudly as she flopped on the couch like a young child. "You just wanted to waste more money on another surprise party." She rose her gaze towards her son, eyeing him with a narrowed gaze. "You just want more cake," she accused. Izuku openly laughed at his mother's words. "I do love cake." "Uh-huh," Inko accused with a grin. "I knew it. It's extortion. Aren't you going to be a hero now? You can't go around committing crimes like that." Izuku rolled his eyes playfully as he swallowed yet another piece of cake. "Call All Might, then I'm sure he'll save you from me," he quipped with a smile, relishing at the pitiful squeak his mother released. The Midoriya household was always a lively one, even if there were only two of them. Izuku didn't mind it. His mother did everything in her power to make him happy. She had gone out of her way to hire personal trainers and tutors for him when he had explained that he wanted to be a hero. As his quirk developed and he got more accustomed to using his flames, he had found out something interesting about his quirk, something he kept to himself and would use once he actually got into UA. His mother, despite struggling to truly support him, would dip in her own pockets to make sure that he himself could achieve his goal. He knew the divorce had been tough on his mother. She had been depressed for a long time, but hadn't allowed it to consume her. Izuku would never forgive his father for what he did. He resented the man, and if he never saw the man again, then so be it. He wasn't sure he'd be able to approach the man without losing himself to anger. Inko wasn't the strongest woman around, but if there was one thing about her that was a constant, it was that she always put him first. Izuku could remember many nights when he was younger that his mother would go without eating. He had been oblivious to her struggles, being a child and whatnot, but there were nights that he'd stay up, quietly listening to the woman, to himself when he was a young child. When he became a hero, he'd give her the world. She deserved it and so much more. If it wasn't for his mother's support and love, he likely wouldn't have gone so hard at trying to become a hero. Time would tell if his dream came true or not. However, he had already taken the first step, and he was confident that he had succeeded in passing it. Izuku smiled to himself as he stood in front of the giant door that would lead him towards his future. Green eyes traced the small sign above it, reading as one. He breathed in deeply before exhaling calmly and opening the door to the room. The first sight he saw was of that straight-laced guy with the glasses who interrupted Present Mike every few seconds. The guy was a bit overbearing, what with his tall stature and stickly personality. Apparently, he and Bakugo were getting into it. He ignored them in favor of gazing upon his classmates. There were some unique people in his class. A pretty girl with pink skin and horns, a super tall and buff guy with kind of looked like one of those ninja from old Japanese movies, and even a boy with the head of a bird. That was pretty cool. The quirk nerd in him was fascinated, but he kept it to himself. He was socially awkward enough, and actively participating in conversation with people he didn't know was enough to make him queasy. Midoriya-san. A familiar voice spoke out from near the back of the room, causing some of the other students to quiet down. Green eyes snapped towards the voice as a nervous smile formed on his face. Yaoyorozu-san. He stammered for a moment before walking, rather fastly, towards the girl's seat. He ignored the curious looks from his classmates, staring down at his feet as he moves closer to the girl he had saved during the entrance exam. He took a seat directly next to her, glancing nervously towards her. The curvy girl has a small smile on her face as she stared at him. "You're a rather nervous guy." "Huh?" She teased lightly. It, of course, caused a small blush to paint his cheeks. He coughed once to compose himself, avoiding staring into her eyes. Lily spoke softly. The wealthy girl only giggled at his response, covering her mouth as she did. What a surprise, she giggled once more before continuing. "I figure with how easily you took out that 0-pointer that you'd be a little more," she struggled to find the exact word, so as to not come off offensive and rude. "Confident?" Izuku instead questioned, staring down at his clasped hands. "Well, I didn't wish to be rude." Yaoyorozu confirmed with a nod of the head. "Your quirk is quite powerful, Midoriya-san." Another blush. "Thank you, Yaoyorozu-san." He mumbled with a small smile. Izuku turned towards the pretty girl as he spoke, eyes shining a little brighter. "Your quirk was pretty cool too. I saw how you created a crowbar from your skin. Are you able to make things? What's the stipulation for doing so? I'm sure there must be a trade-off for producing items and creating them. Is it energy? Mental? Physical? Can you create organic matter too?" He soon devolved into rapid-firing questions at Momo, who could do relatively nothing but watch in silence as Izuku continued to theorize about her quirk and what it couldn't do. Momo blinked slowly as the boy finally paused, taking a large intake of breath before opening his mouth to continue. She interrupted the boy from going off on another rant with a simple ahem. She was highly amused at his widened eyes and blushing face. He was certainly an adorable boy, that was for sure. You are incredibly intelligent and highly perceptive, Midoriya-san. Momo complimented with a small smile, enjoying his reaction at the small praise. It seemed the boy was self-conscious to a degree, but that didn't really make sense to her. She had saw him during the exams. His flames packed a powerful punch, and he definitely knew how to use them. The control and finesse he showcased was something she had only seen from pro heroes. So, wouldn't having a powerful quirk reflect upon the individual who wielded them? Thank you. He accepted the compliment with a soft smile, not used to having prolonged conversations, especially with pretty girls like Yaoyorozu. Momo opened her mouth to talk before a tired voice emanated from the front of the classroom. Quiet down. 13 seconds passed by before the room finally settled down. It was barely passable, Aizawa supposed. But he wouldn't cut them any slack. That took 12 seconds too long. Every second wasted is another person that gets injured, another hero that needs aid, and a villain that gets further away from your reach to cause more harm. Aizawa's bloodshot eyes roamed along the room, taking in the children's expressions. Go get dressed in your gym clothes and meet me out near the track. He ignored the raises hand of one of the various female students, choosing instead to cocoon himself in his yellow sleeping bag. It brought a small smile to Izuku's face. He'd love to have one as well. It'd make life so much easier. He could avoid all manners of human contact if he could just roll himself up in a sleeping bag. Izuku stepped outside alongside his classmates dressed in a standard blue track uniform. He gazed around curiously, following after his classmate to congregate near his new teacher. 26 seconds. The pro hero spoke slow and lazily. You all are horrendously slow. That's a child that just got kidnapped, whisked away to never be seen again. All because you took your sweet time getting here. Well, at least his homeroom teacher was an incredibly dramatic Izuku, mused to himself. He also seemed kind of familiar. He was just having a tough time trying to pinpoint which exact hero the man was. The teacher gazed down at his students before pointing his finger at a rather cute girl in the front. You had a question in the class. Ask it. The round-faced girl stammered for a moment, surprised to be put on the spot. She quickly composed herself before speaking. We didn't get your name, Sensei. Aizawa. The man answered simply. That it? The young girl grimaced at the tone of the man's voice before speaking again. What about orientation? Aren't we supposed to be touring the school? Unnecessary. The tall man shot down instantly. You're here to learn, train, and study what it means to be a pro hero. We're not here to learn pointless information about the school and its history. What matters is your journey on becoming a hero. Well, at least that's cool. The pink-skinned girl commented offhandedly. Apparently, Aizawa-sensei could be even. Pro hero spoke as he activated his quirk, causing his hair to float in the air. His glare became thunderous as he stared down at the students. Is it cool when you see someone die? Is it neat when you see your fellow friends and heroes suffer in pain? Is it awesome to live with the knowledge that, had you been just a little faster, a child's life could have been saved from danger? He allowed his words to sober the teenagers up. Being a hero isn't about fame and glory. It's about doing what's right and protecting those that can't protect themselves. We're not here to play games. If you want to waste someone's time, then do so at your own leisure. You're not about to waste my time because you think being a hero is cool. He stared down at the group of kids before speaking once more. Grow up. The world doesn't care how you feel, and quite frankly, neither do I. Well, that was a sobering thought. Izuku was glad that a lot of that ire wasn't really being directed at him. He didn't necessarily fault the man for his words. It wasn't as if Aizawa-sensei was wrong. Sure, a lot of it was a bit dramatic, but these things happen all the time. Izuku was positive that a lot of pro heroes lived lives full of guilt, blaming themselves for things that were realistically out of their control. It was the lifestyle that they chose. Now that that's out of the way, Aizawa changed the subject from the intense conversation with ease. Does anyone want to take a guess as to why we're out here? He paused for a moment, surveying the group before him. Well, anyone? He questioned with a bored tone. When no one spoke up, Aizawa instead focused on one particular student. How about you, Midoriya? He proposed, watching the boy jump slightly at being called on. You were first place in the entrance exam, a total of 70 villain points and 60 rescue points. You scored nearly double the amount of second place and did so with relative ease. So, entertain me with an answer. The nervous teen blushed at the looks he was receiving from his classmates. Many of them seemed impressed by his score, other than Bakugo, who seemed like he wanted to murder him. No surprise there really, and it surprised everyone else when he returned the boy's vicious glare with one of his own. Izuku shook his head, ignoring Bakugo and his growl of frustration. Well, considering your earlier word about being a hero, I can only assume that you're going to be testing our abilities and giving us a mock test where we might potentially have to use our quirks to our advantage. Aizawa grinned at Izuku's answer. It was not a nice smile. It was terrifying, really. It was like the man didn't know how to actually smile. You hit the nail, Midoriya. He nodded with that scary-looking grin. Tell me, Midoriya, how far could you throw a ball in middle school? The anxious teen furrowed his brow at the pro-hero's question. I don't know, maybe 30 meters? The shaggy-haired man reached behind his back before procuring a small metallic-looking baseball. He tossed the item to Izuku before speaking. Well, use your quirk, and let's find out how far you can really throw it now. Izuku blinked at the man before stepping onto the pitcher's plate and gazing towards the end of the field. He furrowed his eyebrows for a moment before tightly gripping the ball and rearing his arm back. Well, no time like now, huh? Izuku mused mentally. Channeling his quirk, a comforting wave of heat began to emanate around Izuku. The heat began to rise in temperature, causing his classmates and teacher to back away. Fire began to slowly lick at Izuku's hand as he closed his eyes. He clenched his eyes shut as concentration wrought across his face. A moment later, the boy lifted his leg like a baseball pitcher, shifting his hips and upper torso before slamming his foot down and absolutely launching the ball. An explosion of fire detonated from his hand, causing the ball to rocket into the sky. As the ball reached its apex, an unseen force seemed to blast it forward. The unseen force caused an invisible shockwave to detonate in the air. The ball then redirected itself, shooting forward and carrying the momentum from the original blast of fire. Aizawa stared at the scene with furrowed eyebrows. I thought he possessed a fire quirk. Aizawa wasn't the only one to be perplexed by the display. Momo herself was gazing into the sky with a confused expression. The initial burst of flames hadn't been surprising. She expected that considering he used fire for his quirk. But the unseen force that followed after the fact? Curious. After the spectacle, Aizawa glanced at the small device in his hand before grinning. He turned the device around for the entire class to see. The display screen shone 1607 meters. You see, when it comes to heroics and quirks, the school system believes that all children should be considered equal. The shaggy-haired man shook his head at that. It is asinine. Our society is dominated by quirks. Nearly 4/5 people in the world have unique abilities and powers. Not all of them are useful, and many are simple, but at the end of the day, no one is equal in this world. Some of you possess incredibly powerful and flashy quirks. The man's eyes roamed across Izuku, Bakugo, and a certain dual-haired teenage with a scar on his face. And some of you have rather basic quirks. Here, his eyes trailed over a boy with a tail and a girl who was invisible. Some of you will need to work harder than others to achieve your goal and become the hero you were meant to be. It won't be easy, and it sure as hell won't be given to you on a silver platter. Work hard, and don't make me regret my decision of picking you over the other 20 students in Class 1B. I chose all 20 of you, personally. I'd hate to have to expel you because you refused to give it your all. As the motto says, go plus ultra. After the man finished his long-winded speech, he gestured towards the field where a variety of different tools and other obstacles and items were placed to conduct their little test. Izuku had coasted through many of them, not necessarily trying to be the best in class, though he had tried at a lot of the really athletic exercises. He had managed to even beat out Yaoyorozu-san during the 100-meter sprint by using his flames like he had done during the entrance exam, simply flying and cutting through the middle of the track. Aizawa-sensei had complimented him on his ingenuity, merely stating that circumventing the rules to achieve your goals, while negative in the real world, would only work here and not taking any capabilities. After that, though, no one else was allowed to cheat like he had done. Izuku would count that as a victory. He had ended up in the middle of the pack. Not incredibly too high, but not at the bottom. A measly rank 10 he was. He accepted the placing with a small smile, knowing he could have placed better, but not really caring about that. After that, Aizawa gave one of his long-winded and overdramatic speeches, explaining that this was the first step into becoming pro-heroes. It will only get harder from here on out. Go and get changed, and meet me back in the classroom. He turned his gaze on the green-haired teen before continuing. Midoriya, stay back for a moment. The rest of the class meandered off towards the locker room after Aizawa's dismissal. Izuku noticed that Yaoyorozu-san offered a small smile before she too left with the others. Upon being left alone, Izuku turned his attention on his, admittedly, intimidating teacher. He couldn't really get a read on the man, and to the surprise of no one, it caused anxiety to build in his chest. So tell me, Midoriya, Aizawa spoke slowly and methodically. I noticed that you weren't really giving it your all out there. Why is that? Was my threat of expulsion not enough for you? Or do you believe that I won't do so? Izuku cringed at his teacher's words. His eyes fell to the ground as he replied quietly. I'm sorry, sensei. I just don't see a reason to push myself against my classmates. I'm confident in my abilities and my quirk, and competing with people I'll be spending the next 3 years with doesn't really make me excited. Aizawa was silent for a few moments as he crossed his arms against his chest. Competition can promote a healthy rivalry that will push not only yourself, but your classmates. Do you want to hold back your class? Izuku sighed quietly to himself. No, sensei, he stammered for a moment before ultimately sighing again. I've had enough of school rivalries for one lifetime. The pro-hero narrowed his eyes at the boy's statement. He had read up on Midoriya's portfolio, the very same one that Nizu had provided, and had learned quite a bit about the boy. Single mother. On the poorer side. Soft-spoken and introverted. However, what he lacked in speech he more than made up for in the combat degree. His usage of his quirk was near the level of some pro-heroes. Not entirely surprising considering the school he had come from had a relatively lax disposition in regards to quirk usage. The students were often more so than not allowed to utilize their quirks, both inside and even outside of school, regardless of the potential consequences, which meant that fights were quite common in that school, and he knew quite a bit about the bad vital fluid between the boy and Bakugo. However, as a teacher, Aizawa set it up on himself to correct these issues between his students. They were training to become heroes. If they couldn't solve childish rivalries and dislike, then they'd fail on their way to the top. Aizawa sighed quietly to himself before continuing. Midoriya, I know a decent amount of information about you. Probably more than you'd actually expect. He paused for a moment, watching as the boy rose a curious eyebrow towards him. I know the history you and Bakugo share. It was slightly surprising to see how hateful his eyes had become. It was gone just as fast, though, returning to a rather blank expression. It seemed this was more than just a simple rivalry after all. These two seemed to genuinely hate each other. He's the issue, Izuku proclaimed with furrowed eyebrows. The guy's just a bully. All he's ever done is brag about how strong his quirk is and how he's better than everyone else. He's got an ego the size of Japan that's as fragile as a glass house. Lord forbid you try to defend yourself. He's not hero material, he's just a pest. The teen spat with venom. Aizawa resisted the urge to rub his nose. He was an impartial bystander to the history between Bakugo and Midoriya. He would collect both sides and hear from each before making a decision, but for now, he'd placate his green-haired student. Listen, Midoriya. Aizawa started quietly, speaking slowly in hopes of getting through Midoriya. You're not going to like everyone in life. Hell, you might even hate a majority of them. However, you're on a journey. Regardless of why you chose this particular path, you chose it. I'm not asking you to shake hands and be buddy-buddy with Bakugo. However, I want you to conduct yourself properly when in class, and if in the off chance you do come across issues with your classmates, I expect you to come to me with them. I can't say for certain that I'll be able to solve the issues you possess, but I will try because that's what mentors are for. Izuku stared at his teacher for a moment before dipping his head with a soft sigh. I appreciate that, Aizawa-sensei. You're already doing more than any of my teachers at Aldera have done. He shook his head, missing the narrowed gaze from the pro hero. I promise I won't cause issues in class with Bakugo. However, I can't guarantee that I won't finish something that he starts. He needs to be humbled, sensei. He's gone his whole life thinking he's superior to everyone else. That kind of attitude is going to get someone hurt, and I'm not going to stand around and allow that to happen. I just can't. The pro hero stared down at the green-haired student with a hint of respect. He already knew that this kid was going to be the problem child of Class 1A. Well, I'll take your word for it, Midoriya. Don't worry. I'm going to be having this exact conversation with Bakugo as well. It would be remiss of me to only lecture you and not the child who can cause explosions with his sweat. Midoriya cracked a small smile at his teacher's joke. He bowed his head, knowing a dismissal when he heard one. He left the grounds immediately after, on his way to change back into his uniform. Aizawa merely sighed to himself before rubbing his face tiredly. A prodigy in class, already well on his way to becoming a pro hero who lacked basic social skills. You're going to be the end of me, Midoriya. Izuku walked into the classroom with a quiet sigh, eyes roaming across the room. There was only a single seat available to him, and it was next to Yaoyorozu-san. Well, at least that made him feel better. He quickly made his way towards his desk, sitting beside the girl and offering her a timid nod. The taller girl offered him a soft smile before shifting towards him. I'm surprised you didn't score higher, Midoriya-san. She spoke politely. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck as he replied. Quietly, I didn't really give it my all. Momo's eyebrows furrowed at his words. Why not? Were Aizawa-sensei's words not clear enough for you? Or are you just arrogant and don't think we're worth the effort to try against? Midoriya waved his hands frantically, cringing at the accusatory tone in the girl's voice. It's not like that. He chuckled nervously at the girl's rather intense stare. It was personal, Yaoyorozu-san. I spoke with Sensei about it, and we've come to an agreement. I apologize if I came across as uncaring and arrogant in regards to you and the others. It wasn't my intention. The wealthy girl stared at the stuttering boy for a moment before allowing a smile to face her features. That's good. I was beginning to believe that you were an uncouth individual. It would have been a shame. I've enjoyed our talks, small as they may be so far, Midoriya-san. The green-haired teen blushed at the girl's words. Thank you. I also enjoy talking to you, Yaoyorozu-san. Curses. He still stuttered. When would the nervousness disappear? He was making a fool of himself. In front of such a pretty girl. His life sucked. Momo's cheeks blazed at Izuku's words. It seemed as if the boy didn't even realize he had spoken those words out loud. Ichi thinks I'm pretty? The beautiful girl squirmed in her seat, eyes glancing over to the teen who was still quietly rambling to himself. Should she say something? What could she say? Was he trying to court her? She wasn't ready for this. She didn't know a thing about relationships. She placed her hands on her cheeks, rapidly shaking her head back and forth in embarrassment as her thoughts dissolved rapidly at the prospect of having a boyfriend. All right, class. Aizawa spoke as he entered the class. He waited a few moments for the quiet to settle down. 6 seconds seems you're already improving. 6 seconds too long, though. But it's commendable, I guess. The man sighed quietly as he stood in the front of the class. Your syllabus is in front of you, and in it contains all the necessary information about what you'll be studying and who you'll be studying with. Make sure to memorize it and take your studies seriously. I shouldn't need to explain myself any further. Now, you're free to do as you please for the remainder of the class. Just don't be loud. After his words, the man proceeded to disappear behind his desk, crawling into his sleeping bag and zipping himself up. The classroom was silent for a few seconds before descending into quiet chatter amongst the students. Izuku was quiet for a bit as he glanced at Yaoyorozu-san, noticing that she was speaking to a few of the female students, namely the girl who had long ears and the pink-skinned girl. Izuku pursed his lips for a moment before returning his attention to his desk. He clasped his hands together on the desk, clenching them and closing his eyes. The boy began to concentrate as he channeled the power of his quirk. A hint of gold and red began to emanate from his hands as he began to form a tiny fireball in the palm of his hands. Izuku opened his eyes with a smile, staring at the floating ball of fire. His smile grew a bit larger as he began to stretch and flex his fingers. His actions caused the small fireball to slowly twirl and spin around his fingers, dancing off his digits and rolling across the back of his hand. With but a single thought, he caused the ball of fire to twist in shape. It grew in intensity before Izuku manipulated the fire to change shape. It flickered multiple times, shining brightly, changing colors from various reds, oranges, and yellows. "Whoa, so pretty!" Izuku yelped quietly at the voice, snuffing the fireball out almost immediately. His green eyes snapped to the voice, noticing a pair of black and amber eyes staring directly at him. "Your quirk is really cool, Midoriya." The pink-haired girl with horns on her head complimented with a large grin. "What's it called, Nay?" Izuku stammered at the girl, slightly backing up due to how close she was. This girl didn't really understand boundaries. Huh? Well, not that it really bothered Izuku. Most people didn't talk to him regardless. Thanks. Well, I call it psychoheliokinesis, and it allows me to basically manipulate fire. It's a bit more complex than that, but that's just the general basis of it. He responded shyly with a small smile. The pink-skinned girl placed her elbows on the boy's table, leaning onto the boy's desk with a large grin. "That's so cool. What a flashy quirk. And you're really good with it. I saw some of your work in the entrance exam. You were all like, hiya, and wash. It was so cool." Izuku's cheeks blushed heavily as the girl gushed about his quirk and his combat abilities during the entrance exam. Another pretty girl was talking to him. "That was 2 in one day. How crazy was that? You think I'm pretty?" The pink-skinned girl asked with a large grin, leaning even closer to her green-haired classmate. "Most people think I'm kind of scary looking when they see me. It's like they think I'll bite him or something." She giggled after her words, not noticing the horrified expression on Izuku's face. He said that out loud. Oh no. His life was ruined. Izuku immediately devolved in a gibberish muttering that revolved around how weird and socially awkward he was around people. "I think you broke him, Ashido." Another girl spoke from behind the pink-skinned girl. She had short purple hair and dangly earlobes that looked like the end of a cord on headphones. She continued to stare at the gibbering boy before nodding her head with a chuckle. "Yeah, you definitely borked him." Mina Ashido smiled to herself as she glanced towards the girl who had spoken. "I didn't mean to, Jiro. I thought he was pulling my leg for a sec." Momo then spoke up, glancing towards the boy who was finally getting around to composing himself. "It seems Midoriya-san has trouble keeping his thoughts to himself." She fought the dash of pink trying to form on her face at his earlier compliment. "Though, I highly doubt he isn't speaking from place of honesty. He strikes me as the earnest type." "Duh!" Mina cooed as she placed her hands on her cheeks while swaying side to side. "Midori-kun is so adorable." Izuku finally managed to compose to himself, hearing the tail end of Mina's words. His cheeks blazed anew at the girl's nickname. "And Midori-kun?" he questioned with a minor stutter. "Hi." The bubbly girl nodded her head with a grin. "Your new nickname. Come on, Ashido." Jiro spoke with a small smirk, rubbing the girl's shoulder. "Explode." Hi. The upbeat girl mumbled with a growing smile, finally relenting on the green-haired boy. "I'm Mina Ashido. It's nice to meet you, Izuku Midori-kun." The green-haired teen offered the girl a timid smile. "Nice to meet you, Ashido-san." The purple-haired girl offered the boy a small wave as she introduced herself. "Kyokujiro. What's up?" Izuku offered the girl the same timid smile he gave Ashido. "Nice to meet you, Jiro-san." Momo finally rejoined the conversation, leaning her head on her hand. "You said your quirk was called psychoheliokinesis?" Izuku glanced at the girl as he nodded his head. "That's a pretty complex name, Midoriya-san. How much actual control do you have over those flames?" The wealthy girl asked with a curious expression. Izuku's smile was a lot more genuine as he spoke about his quirk. "Anything I can imagine, I can make my flames do. If I want them to take various shapes and form, then I'm able to do so. I can make my flames move how I wish with ease." So, do you create the fire? Jiro asked with a raised eyebrow. Midoriya nodded his head at the answer. Any drawbacks? Midoriya merely shrugged his shoulders. Just small headaches if I use too much of them at one time. When you saved Yao Momo from the giant zero-pointer, did you feel any headaches? Ashido asked with a curious smile. Izuku shook his head in the negative. And no, not any. The three girls' eyes widened at the answer. None? Jiro asked incredulously. That last explosion of fire was crazy huge. Midoriya merely chuckled quietly as he rubbed the back of his neck. Heat seared up the back of his neck at the girls' reactions to his quirk. I've had a lot of practice, he offered lamely with a small smile. I'll say, Jiro replied with a raised eyebrow. From what everyone said about your performance, you were on a whole other level. It actually became super difficult to find robots that weren't burnt to a crisp. Mina chuckled with a grin. Midori-kun was making it hard to actually score villain points. She giggled after her words, noticing the boy becoming more bashful. Not to mention that you destroyed that zero-pointer with one blast of fire and even made it rain ash. Momo complimented with a small smile. Also, you saved my life at the cost of tearing the muscles in your arms. Midoriya accepted the praise with burning cheeks. Well, I could have avoided that, but some things are better left as a surprise. That's what a real hero would have done. The boy muttered while glancing down at his desk. I just moved. Huh. Mina giggled with a grin. Seems like Midori-kun is well on his way to being a pro-hero. Oh, I'm so excited now. It seems like you embody what it means to be a real hero, Midoriya-san. Momo complimented with a beautiful smile. The bell soon rang afterwards, interrupting the students and causing them to slowly file out of the room. They all moved through their designated classes, slowly getting used to the new environment and everything they'd eventually have to do while being enrolled in UA. The day came and went, and it was relatively a blur for Izuku. He had slowly gotten used to being around Yaoyorozu-san, Jiro-san, and Ashido-san. They had even sat at lunch with him, and while they had mostly been the ones to talk, he occasionally was asked questions and answered them with only the slightest of stutters. Apparently, Ashido-san thought it was adorable and Jiro-san believed it to be endearing. Yaoyorozu-san, he couldn't really pinpoint how she felt about it, but he did know that she didn't relatively mind it. As the final bell rang, signaling that school was officially over, Izuku smiled in relief. He slowly stood to his feet while grabbing his bag and placing various papers and binders into it. He swung the bag around, shouldering the object, and made to move before halting as a familiar face blocked his exit. His normally shy and nervous persona bled away as he stared at the one person he could definitively say, without a doubt, that he hated. Get out of my way, Bakugo. Izuku spoke with an annoyed tone, ignoring the curious expressions of some of his fellow classmates. I don't have time for you today. The blonde teen smirked at Izuku's words as he grabbed on the strap to his own backpack. Yeah, well, make some extra. Izuku's expression shifted into a glare as he stared into the boy's eyes. Move before I make you. He stepped into Bakugo, coming chest to chest with the boy. Wouldn't want to get embarrassed on your first day, would you? Bakugo scoffed at the boy's threat. You still think you got a chance over me? You're nothing but a weakling. A stepping stone made to hold me up. You want to go, Deku? Think you're better than me? Izuku's expression only became harsher as he bashed his forehead against Bakugo's. I am better than you. At everything. He pushed the boy back a step with a quiet snarl. I can't wait to humble you. That stupid quirk of yours that you love so much isn't going to matter to me. The normally shy and socially awkward teen pulled away from Bakugo, ignoring his ferocious expression before shoulder checking the taller blonde. The explosive quirk user was forced to brace himself on one of the desks, pushing them along the classroom and causing several scrapes from his action. What? You think you can look down on me? Deku! He screamed at the green-haired teen who continued to walk away. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. As Izuku opened the door to the classroom, he offered Bakugo a cold stare. I pity you, I really do, Bakugo. Grow up. The fire user stepped through the door after his parting statement, ignoring how angry his old classmate from Aldera got. He didn't care about what Bakugo had to say. Despite his promise to Aizawa-sensei, Izuku wasn't going to turn the other cheek anymore. He'd been getting slapped for the past 10 years because of it. No more. If Bakugo wanted to fight, then he'd give him a war. Nothing was going to stand in his way to achieve his goal. Not Bakugo. Not some 2-bit villain with a gimmick quirk. Nothing. Midoriya-san. Midoriya-san. So lost in his thoughts that he was surprised when someone placed their hand on his shoulder. He nearly retaliated at the action, believing it to be Bakugo trying to start a fight. Izuku paused at the last moment as he caught a glimpse of long, spiky black hair. He halted himself from twisting the girl's hand, having nearly slammed her over his shoulder. Yaoyorozu-san, he exclaimed in surprise, having not expected the pretty girl to chase after him. The wealthy girl released her hold on the boy, staring at the teen with concern in her eyes. There? The green-haired teen grimaced at the question. His gaze passed by Yaoyorozu, spotting Ishido and Jiro making their way towards him. He released a quiet before patiently waiting for the other two to show up. He didn't necessarily want to repeat himself with what he was about to say, and avoiding their questions would be more work than he'd want to deal with. They were certainly assertive women. When the other two girls reached him, he spoke quietly. Bakugo, and I have a lot of history, none of it any good. He's the only person I can say with full confidence that I hate. His words briefly shocked the three girls, not at all expecting this from the normally shy and nervous boy. He's nothing but a bully with a fragile ego. If he's not the best at something, it's because someone cheated. If he's not the strongest, it's because it wasn't worth his time. All he's ever done is hold on to this delusion about becoming the #1 hero. Izuku turned his head to the side and scoffed while shaking his head. Bakugo's only saving grace is the fact that he's highly skilled in combat and knows how to utilize his quirk with lethal precision. Without any of that, little is left to be desired. He's brash, loud, cruel, and arrogant, hardly decent qualities of a hero. He needs to be humbled before he gets someone hurt, or worse, killed. After his rant, he glanced over to the three girls and noticed how surprised they seemed to be. It caused a fresh wave of anxiety to course through his veins. Had he spoke too much? Would they think he had some kind of unnecessary grudge and dislike of his former bully? Did they think he was weird now? He wouldn't necessarily blame them. He was kind of odd after all. Ishido was the first to recover. Wow, that's the most amount of words you've said today without a stutter. You must really hate that Bakugo guy, huh? That's your only takeaway? He squawked. Ishido giggled at the boy's question. I'm just yanking your chain, Midori-kun. Her Cheshire grin made his cheeks blush. But now that you mention it, that Bakugo guy did seem a bit annoying? Jiro supplied while crossing her arms against her chest. The guy's a nutcase with a quirk to match it. Dude didn't even give me a chance to cover my ears before setting off explosions. I already don't like him. I will admit, Yorozu spoke up slowly, thumb stroking her chin with a pensive expression. His personality does leave little to be desired. He is very crude and unnecessarily loud. Izuku was quiet for a few moments before offering the girls a small smile. I have personal issues with him, and I don't really want anyone to get between them. What happens between Bakugo and I stays between Bakugo and I. This is something I personally need to tackle and solve. A frown marred Momo's face as she spoke. Even heroes need help once in a while. Ishido and Jiro nodded lightly at that. Izuku grimaced at the girl's words. I prefer to, not drag people into my personal issues. It's not fair to saddle others with unnecessary drama when I'm fully capable of dealing with it myself. Come on, Midoriya. Jiro spoke up while twirling one of her unique earlobes. What are friends for? Friends? He questioned with a minor amount of surprise on his face. You guys want to be my friend? I thought we hit it off pretty good today. Mina spoke with a cute pout on her face. You saying you don't want to hang out with us anymore? Izuku rose his hands up and shook them frantically. Of course not. That's not what I meant. I don't want to burden anyone. You're not a burden, Midoriya-san. Momo responded in a stern tone. We're going to be future heroes, right? He nodded his head quietly, eyes glancing towards the ground. Then I'd be a terrible hero and friend if I didn't try to help you. Yeah, Mina cheered with a grin, pumping her fist in an adorable manner. What Yao Momo said. I gotta agree with them, Midoriya. Jiro added with a shrug and a small smile. Friends ought to stick together. Izuku stared at the three girls in surprise, not having expected to make actual friends on his first day. Or, well, friends at all, really. I've never had friends before, Izuku mumbled quietly as he stared at the ground. Everyone usually avoids talking to me because I'm socially awkward. Mina waved her hand as if to say, who cares? Don't worry what others have to say about you, Midori-kun. I think you're a pretty cool guy. Midoriya just smiled at the girl's compliment. He was slowly getting used to Mina's boisterous personality. Thanks, he smiled at Mina before shifting his gaze to the other two girls. All of you, it feels nice. He mumbled in a bashful manner, avoiding their gazes. Adorable. The three girls all thought simultaneously. Izuku rubbed the back of his head as the three girls then went on to make small talk with one another, speaking about their day and how interesting their future was going to be. The teen walked just slightly behind them, listening to their words with a small smile, but not really contributing. He did enjoy the silence. Up until the girls basically dragged him into the conversation, making it their mission to get him to speak more. It felt good. Maybe that a high wasn't going to be so bad after all. Only time would truly tell. So tell me about it. Inko's excited voice resonated through their small apartment. How was your first day? Izuku spared his mom a small glance, watching as she stood over the stove while making a simple pot of stew. It was good. I made some friends. The excited gleam in his mom's eyes made him blush. He knew what was about to come. Honey, Inko cried in a joyous tone. I'm so happy for you. She spun on her heels, leaving the large wooden spoon in the pot of stew. 3 short steps carried her towards her son, wrapping him up in a fierce hug. You make me so proud. No words left Izuku's mouth. What could he realistically say to convey the emotions he was experiencing? His mother was his everything. She supported his goals. She believed in him. She put him first over herself and her needs. It often made him feel guilty at times. Her life practically revolved around him. He didn't necessarily mind the attention and everything else his mother showered him with, but at the end of the day, she was an adult woman with her own life. Izuku wanted what was best for his mother, just as she wanted what was best for himself. These weren't new thoughts, and while Izuku was a soft-spoken boy, he didn't hold back his thoughts when speaking with his mother. It was the only source of arguments that believed his mother should make time for herself and do things that actively made her happy, while Inko would vehemently state that what she was doing did make her happy. It was a revolving issue that never seemed to actually get solved between the both of them. Izuku knew why, though, but bringing it up was a sore subject for both of them. Had his father not been a raging piece of they wouldn't be in this situation in the first place. Izuku only wanted to see his mother truly happy and live for herself. He absolutely loved, the attention and care she gave to him, but he wanted the same thing for her. He was 15 now, well on his way to realizing his dream and fulfilling it. His mother was getting older, and while it pained him to see her aging, he wanted her to experience the rest of her life with no regrets. Mommy spoke softly, watching as the woman's shoulders grew stiff at his tone. You already know what I'm about to say. Inko cut him off. Izuku. Her green eyes hardened as she pulled away from her son, hands coming up to caress the boy's cheek. I've told you 1,000 times that I'm happy. Please, you worry about me more than I do. He felt frustration swell in his chest, and before he could rein it in, it burst through him. Who else is going to worry about you then? Hizashi. I only want to see you happy, Mom. After his words, Izuku very nearly cringed. His anger fizzled out, and he clenched his eyes shut, already knowing that tears were starting to form. I'm sorry, Izuku muttered quietly, fisting his palms. I didn't mean. Inko merely shook her head as she pulled her son closer. Tears swam in her eyes as she stroked her son's hair. Izuku, honey, I know what's going on in your head. I know how perceptive you can be. I'm sure you've seen me in some of my most miserable states. She sniffled quietly when she felt his arms wrap around her, holding her tightly. The divorce wasn't just hard on me. I know what it did to you, Izuku. Izuku only hugged his mother tighter. I made a promise to myself, Izuku. Inko quietly whispered, that I'd do everything in my power to give you a normal childhood. I wasn't perfect. I know that. I wasn't the best mother, and I'm not going to even try to argue about it. but I tried. I never stopped caring about your father, but he gave up on us. She inhaled deeply, exhaling shakily. Izuku, you don't need to worry about me. All that I care about is seeing you happy. You kept me going when I thought I lost everything. You're the reason I wake up every day, busting my arse at the hospital. So please, honey, just let me worry about us for the next couple of years. That's all I'm asking for. Izuku could only cry at his mother's words, unable to rally a response to the words. Nay, Jiro. Mina prodded the music enthusiast as they walked through the security gates of UA. You think we're going to do some hero stuff today? The petite purple-haired girl twirled her long earlobes at the question. I hope so. To be really cool to finally wear our hero costumes too. On a whim, Jiro turned her head towards the entrance of the school before tilting her head. She stopped walking, causing her pink-skinned friend to also halt abruptly. Is that a limo? Jiro questioned confusedly. Mina spoke with raised eyebrows. Someone's loaded. No kidding. What? Or rather, who stepped out of the fancy car had both girls reeling. Yaoyorozu / Yaomomo. Both girls spoke at the same time, staring at the now discovered rich girl. They watched as she bowed to her maid, taking the offered book bag before slowly making her way through the security gate. How rich are you, Yaomomo? Mina questioned rather loudly from the entrance of the school. You got your own personal limo and maids. Momo herself froze at the girl's words, eyes widening to saucers as she stared at her recently made friends. A nuclear blush exploded on her face as she bowed her head before moving towards the girls, ignoring the quiet whispers from random students. Upon reaching her friends, she spoke softly in an embarrassed tone. Oh well, I'm the heir to the Yaoyorozu family. My mother and father own Yaoyorozu Incorporated. She calmed herself slightly, willing the blush to disappear. My parents' company is responsible for nearly 35% of all of Japan's trade, so we're kind of wealthy. Jiro stared at the girl as if she was crazy. Kind of, she questioned in a ludicrous tone. Dude, you're like a billionaire. Mina laughed as Momo began to squirm in place. Wow, Yaomomo. Didn't think us peasants were allowed to talk to someone like you. The girl's words were obviously said in a joking manner, and Momo knew that, but she couldn't quite keep the anger at bay. It showed too, bleeding in her face as she stared at the two girls. Sorry, Yaomomo. Mina apologized immediately, easily seeing the anger on the wealthy girl's face. It was just a joke. Momo grimaced at the girl's words before composing herself. She took a deep breath before slowly exhaling. I apologize, Ashido-san. It's just I get treated differently when people find out who I really am. I try to not let it affect me. But Jiro donned a sympathetic expression. Nah, it's cool, dude. She waved off the wealthy girl's words. I totally understand. My mom and dad are pretty successful musicians and have toured around a ton of countries. We're not the richest people, but we definitely don't struggle. I can get where you're coming from, if only a little bit. Mina glanced towards Jiro with a curious gaze. You're loaded too? No tact, this one. Mina was a blunt girl who spoke what was on her mind, but she was never overtly rude about her questions and statements. She just said things as they were. The purple-haired teen blushed at the girl's question. I wouldn't say we're loaded, but we definitely have some things we don't need. Mina only grinned at the girl's embarrassment. Cool. Me and my family are pretty poor. Jiro couldn't help the snort of laughter that escaped her at Mina's blunt words. Momo only seemed horrified at Jiro's reaction. The pink-skinned girl only laughed in a boisterous manner at the two girls, not even feeling remotely offended by Jiro's reaction. She loved to make people laugh and smile, regardless if she'd be the butt of the joke to do so. It's fine, Yaomomo. Mina grinned as she spoke, assuaging the creation Quirk user. It is what it is. I think it's pretty cool that you're trying to be a hero. You could have just gone into the family business and lived an easy life. Being a pro-hero is way harder than running a business that's already super successful. Momo calmed her raging before replying. Thank you, Ashido-san. I've had a lot of things just handed to me in life due to my name. While I'm blessed to be in this position, I know there are people who are less fortunate in life. There are people who can't help themselves, and when I think about them, her face contorted sadly. It makes me feel gross that I have all this power and money, and am unable to truly utilize it to help those people. She sighed to herself as she continued. I was even given a recommendation exam because of my status. I naturally declined it. If I'm going to be a pro hero, then I want to earn it. I don't want it given to me because I have money. That's not why I decided to become a hero. I just want to help people. Mina and Jiro nodded their heads, newfound respect showing for their friend. That's so cool. Mina responded in her typical, upbeat fashion way. My reason's pretty lame. I just wanted to show people that I'm not some weird-looking monster. Yeah, I shoot acid from his hands and stuff, and I look pretty unique, but that doesn't mean I'm any different than any other person. I believe that's very admirable, Ashido-san. Momo complimented with a smile. Even in today's age, there are far too many people who hold prejudices against those with mutation quirks. They can't help that they look different. They didn't ask for those changes. Jiro smiled at the pink-skinned girl. Yeah, dude, I don't think that's lame at all. I think it's pretty cool. She twirled one of her earlobes, eyes glancing to the dangling appendage. I got my fair share of bullying from my quirk when I was younger. It made me dislike them for a period of time. But as I grew older, I kind of just stopped caring what anyone had to say about me. She shrugged her shoulders with a smile as she continued. I'm not the prettiest girl around, and I definitely don't got curves like you, Yaoyorozu, but I'm proud of who I am. Momo only blushed deeply at the girl's words. Please don't say such things, Jiro-san. Mina giggled at the girl's embarrassment. I think you're super pretty, Jiro. Like, supermodel level. This time, Jiro was the one to blush in embarrassment. Come on, dude, you're blowing it out of proportion. The acid quirk user only grinned at the girl's embarrassment. I don't know, Jiro. I think you're hella pretty. A twinkle gleamed in her eyes as she saw a particularly nervous boy finally walk through the security gates. Oh, well, how about we ask Midori-kun? I'm sure he's got tons of things to say about you, Jiro. Before the short-haired girl could stop Mina, she was already racing across the campus, shouting the boy's nickname to get his attention. Jiro could only look on in horror as Mina took the boy's wrist, ignoring his stuttering and dragging him towards them. Momo could only offer the girl a sympathetic gaze. Nay, Midori-kun. Mina spoke boisterously as she finally came to a stop near their little group. So, Jiro doesn't think she's pretty. The girl pointedly ignored Jiro's squawk of surprise and disbelief. Me and Yao Momo, on the other hand, think she's gorgeous. So, we need a third-party decision, and that third party is you. So what you think? The nervous teen offered Jiro a tiny glance, eyes roaming along her face for the briefest of moments, causing an embarrassed blush to form on the girl's own face. Dude, Jiro hissed with a heavy blush. Why do you drag Midoriya into this? I never said I wasn't. Whatever Jiro had been about to say was cut off as Mina spoke out. So, opinions, Midori-kun. We need your expertise. Expertise? Izuku squeaked with red cheeks. Well, what makes you think I'm an expert at this? Ashido-san, you're too much. Momo commented quietly, shaking her head at the situation. Well, you're a pretty handsome guy. Mina complimented with an easygoing smile, speaking earnestly. So I figured you'd be able to best judge. Handsome. Ashido-san thought he was handsome. Yes, I do. She giggled cutely, amused that he had once again said those words out loud. Dude, you're gonna break him, Jiro muttered quietly, still embarrassed about the entire situation. Look, Midoriya, you don't have to answer. It's perfectly fine. Mina was just. The girl was once again interrupted, but this time, it wasn't Mina to interrupt her, but Izuku. I think you're really pretty, Jiro-san. Izuku stammered with a small smile and a huge blush. You do? The purple-haired girl asked with a blush. She glanced towards her earlobes, slightly annoyed to see them twisting around her radically, almost like a dog's tail when they were excited. Izuku only offered the girl a timid nod, not trusting his words due to his stuttering habit. He was having a hard enough time just coasting through his morning due to the serious talk with his mother. Now, he was being dragged into a situation where he had to compliment a girl's looks? It was already too much. Duh! Mina cooed with a teasing smile. Is it a blush, Jiro? Jiro hissed at the girl's question before mentally commanding one of her earlobes to bonk Mina on the forehead. The girl stumbled back in surprise at the action, not expecting it at all. Come on, man. Jiro pleaded with bloody cheeks. Stop with that. The acid Quirk user relented on the teasing, giggling quietly to herself as she eyed the girl's earlobe retract back towards her. I thought it was cute. Please, Ashido-san, refrain from teasing Jiro-san and Midoriya-san. Momo spoke up in defense of her two friends. Does that mean I can tease you instead? Mina asked with an innocent smile, clasping her hands behind her back. I prefer you not, to the wealthy girl replied back with furrowed eyebrows. No promises. Mina dragged her sentence on in a sing-song-like tone. After her awards, the school bell proceeded to ring loudly, signaling that classes were now starting. The quartet immediately made to leave after that, hustling to get to their homeroom. The three girls would talk about various things, whether it be happenings on social media, viral funny videos, or even their favorite heroes. They'd occasionally ask Izuku his own opinion on various topics, and he'd answer them quietly. The fact they listened to his words so earnestly made Izuku feel warm inside. He couldn't believe he had made actual friends, especially with three pretty girls. That was something he didn't think was even possible. The three girls in question proceeded to then blush. Once again, Midoriya seemed completely oblivious to the fact that he was speaking aloud. It seemed that this was going to be a common occurrence with a nervous boy. Perhaps they should let him know that he spoke his thoughts aloud more often than not. That'd possibly make things worse, all things considered best to leave it alone. Classes went on as usual. With Aizawa, they learned well. They were quickly figuring out that Aizawa was a dramatic man. Most of their work was that of practical and non-practical hypothetical situations in which you, as the pro hero, get placed in and have to again, hypothetically, maneuver through to reach success. It was complicated, yes, and was merely theory application at its base core, but it would be helpful all the same. A prepared hero was a smart hero. Or at least, that's what Aizawa-sensei said. Izuku would believe him. He had found out who exactly the man was, and was not at all surprised upon realizing he was talking to Racerhead. The capture scarf should have been a dead giveaway. Izuku thought his skills were diminishing. Rookie mistakes, honestly. The rest of the day went on as usual. They learned modern hero art history with Midnight, English with Present Mike, no surprise there, modern literature with Cementos, actually a surprise, heroics with Snipe, and finishing off the day with mathematics with Ectoplasm. Or at least, that's what Izuku had thought. It wasn't until All Might himself burst through the door, launching said object through the window and interrupting Ectoplasm and saying, shouting, I am here. Now, Izuku was awkward. That was no secret. He'd been living with that his whole life, and rarely did he ever let it drag him down. However, if there was one thing that Izuku was incredibly confident about, aside from his quirk of course, was the knowledge he possessed on All Might. The man was his favorite pro hero and had been the source of his motivation and drive to become a pro hero ever since he was a child. Well, that was completely unnecessary, All Might. Ectoplasm commented dryly. The muscular hero merely coughed lightly, rubbing the back of his head. Apologies, Ectoplasm. I was just excited. Yes, I can see that the man replied before bowing his head. I shall leave it to you then, All Might. The clone-making pro hero proceeded to then leave the room, allowing the number one hero to take the floor. Izuku listened to the words of his favorite hero numbly, completely floored that his idol would be one of his teachers for the remainder of his team at UA. He could idly hear some of his classmates gushing about how cool All Might was. Izuku himself was still shell-shocked at the information. So wrapped up in his thoughts, he was caught by surprise when he felt a pair of hairs, pink ones at that, mush his cheeks together. Midori-kun, Mina called out with a grin, squeezing and mushing his cheeks together. Earth to Midori-kun, calling all men to station. Yoho, Ashido-san, Izuku mumbled quietly, not really making an effort to remove the girl's hands from his face. Ishoteamer. Mina continued to grin, ignoring her fellow classmates as they started to leave the room to get dressed in their hero costumes. She finally removed her hands from the boy's face, grin splitting her features. Fan of All Might? Instead of the nervousness she initially expected from a boy, she was slightly surprised to see the boy's face glow. The biggest. I know everything about him. The day he debuted, the costume he wore, all of his major and minor rescues. He's my favorite hero. Wow, dude, Jiro commented as she idly made her way down the small steps of the classroom. So, you're a mega fanboy, huh? Izuku could only chuckle nervously at the girl's words. Hey, yeah, I guess you could call me an All Might fanboy. Well, I find it endearing, Momo commented with a smile, appearing from behind Izuku while nearly scaring him half to death. You idolize one of the most popular and true-to-character heroes in the world. It doesn't surprise me that you wish to help people because it's the right thing to do. Izuku's eyes dropped to the suitcase in front of him, slightly confused as to when exactly it had appeared. He shrugged it off, though, chalking it up to being comatose at having seen All Might. Being a hero, it's all I've ever wanted to do. Ever since I could talk and walk, I've idolized All Might. He paused for a moment to gather his thoughts. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to save people like him, not for the fame or the glory or the money or any of that. I wanted to become a hero like All Might so that one day, I could inspire a child like All Might did for me. I want to be someone's reason for becoming a hero and doing what's right. Not because they'll benefit from it, but because it's just the right thing to do. There was a heavy silence in the room following the boy's words. It caused him to raise his gaze towards his friends, noticing their slightly odd expressions. It didn't stop there, as even some of his classmates had been, listening in on what he had to say. Despite not knowing them as well as he did Jiro, Ashido, and Yaoyorozu, he could tell that some of them seemed moved by his words and even impressed. "Young man," a boisterous voice declared from the front of the room. "What is your name?" Izuku's eyes snapped to the sound, widening to saucers upon noticing that All Might himself was staring directly at him. "Izuku Midoriya." He nervously half-shouted to the amusement of his 3 girlfriends or friend-girls. Yes, that's the word. All Might's buff and muscular body seemed to grow even more buff as the man stood taller, crossing his arms against his chest. "Your words, I can say that is an absolute honor to meet someone who's not only such a huge fan of mine, but someone that carries on my own beliefs. I believe that one day you, Izuku Midoriya, can become a great hero. I look forward to the day that you debut, young man. I will be cheering alongside the many men, women, and children as well." With those parting words, the #1 hero proceeded to leave the room. His words shocking not only Izuku, but the rest of the class as well. The classroom was entirely silent after All Might's words. None of the students really had anything to say in regards to the man's words. Well, everyone aside from one person. Gonna be hard to top that one, Midori Koen. Mina giggled with a large smile. "You're setting the bar just a little too high for the rest of us, haha." It only caused an embarrassed smile to sprout on the boy's face, which in turn caused Jiro and Yaoyorozu to giggle at his expense. Izuku sighed quietly to himself as he sat in the boys' locker room, staring down at the suitcase that possessed his hero costume. When he was younger, he had originally based many of his potential costume designs off of All Might, which was to the surprise of no one. Figuratively speaking, of course. He didn't really have friends, so anyone that knew anything about him was few and far between. His mom didn't count. He had drawn up a bevy of designs, ranging from spandex tights and capes to even armored suits equipped with tack rigs. But as he perused the internet one day, looking at media and content from the pre-Quirk era, he had come across a particular interesting manga. Izuku was by no means a manga and anime enjoyer, though there was quite a few interesting ones with unique premises, but this particular series had caught his eye. It all centered around a young boy who possessed the ability to see ghosts. The series would later evolve and change, centering around the main protagonist's need to protect his friends and loved ones. The teen would go through several trials and tribulations, and had even managed to accept who he was and become spiritually whole, merging to the various souls that inhabited his body. By the end of the series, the main character had gone on to defeat an immortal being hellbent on restarting life to achieve some semblance of balance and become the supreme ruler of all things. Now, why did this matter and what made it relate to his hero costume? Well, that would be in part due to the reason that his costume was inspired by one of the antagonists in the manga. It was horribly cliché, and Izuku knew that, but he liked the sleek design chosen by this faction of enemy. It certainly helped that the individual he was basing his costume off also could fire to an absurd degree and shoot flames out of his fingers. The man had a ridiculous name, and it was best to keep that to himself. While some would look at him oddly for finding inspiration through an individual that was a villain, Izuku could care less. Media depicted all villains as what they were, villains. But Izuku also knew that not every individual who committed crimes did so because they were fundamentally evil people. Some people in life had no other choice. Committing crime was how they survived, and he'd be a pretty terrible person to judge those for having never walked a day in their life. However, at some point, there came a line that just couldn't be crossed. Was Izuku confident enough in his beliefs that he could concisely pinpoint those lines? No, of course not. He was an idealistic kid who dreamt of being a hero to save anyone he could. But was it a crime to be idealistic? To want to do good in the world? It wasn't a sin to be a child. Everyone needed to grow up one day, but that didn't mean you had to become cynical either. Izuku pushed those thoughts to the back of his head, eyes gazing around the room and noticing that his classmates were nearly finished with their costumes. He returned his gaze to the suitcase before opening it up and smiling. Izuku walked down the tunnel with the rest of his classmates, heart thundering in his chest as he neared All Might's position. The pro hero gave a boisterous roar of approval at the students' costumes, complimenting them and wishing them luck in their journey. He also provided the means and information for acquiring upgrades and minor adjustments should they need so, but would have to be done on their own time. Whoa, Midori-kun! Mina gushed as she slid into view, wearing a very tight outfit that did little to hide her figure. That's pretty slick. Izuku honestly tried not to stare. Her low-cut jacket did virtually nothing but add a little flair and make the colors of her outfit pop. The boy averted his gaze with a blush, nearly fainting at Yaoyorozu's costume. There was just so much skin. It didn't help that the girl was already incredibly curvy. Was this design even legal? How did her leotard even stay on? Your costume is very suave, Midoriya-san. Momo complimented with a smile. I didn't expect you to have a taste for more formal clothing. Izuku did everything in his power to not look at Momo. Oh dude, I love the boots. Jiro finally made herself known as she saddled up next to Momo, smiling as she gazed at his costume. The gloves are a nice touch too. Jiro, her costume certainly fit her, that was for sure. Izuku got a punk rock vibe from it, and it honestly fit the girl. Her leather black jacket and combat boots that very clearly held some form of amps, so she could utilize her earphone jacks better. It was so cool, and the face paint was a really nice touch. Thank you for the compliments. Izuku mumbled with a smile. You all look nice as well. His voice got increasingly more nervous as he spoke, obviously referring to the rather revealing outfit on Momo and how tight Mina's was. The girls all laughed at the response, with Momo merely smiling at his hidden concern. My quirk works through the usage of my skin. While not entirely practical having an outfit such as this, it doesn't particularly bother me. Nudity isn't something that should always be lewd, though. I can do without the stares from some people. Though some people being Mineta and Kaminari, of course. The two open closet perverts of Class 1, they weren't relatively subtle, nor were they particularly intelligent about it either. Girl, Mina spoke with a grin, clasping at her low-cut jacket. If I had your figure, I'd be strutting my stuff. Momo blushed at the girl's comment. Unnecessary, Ashido-san. It only caused the girl to giggle. Where'd you get your inspiration from, Midoriya? Jiro instead asked, steering the conversation away from that particularly dangerous subject. Midoriya was already a nervous guy. Giving him potential imagery was going to cause him to combust, and probably not in the good way. Izuku glanced down at his costume with a small smile. His attire was that of a white uniform, equipped with a black vest, which was unbuttoned. The shirt beneath the vest was bleached white, equipped with a hooded cloak. Over his black vest, he donned a white blazer that was unbuttoned, black gloves with a unique symbol on the back of them, and white pants which were tucked into a pair of black military boots. For protective purposes under his vest and shirt, he wore a Kevlar chest plate. Upon his waist was a utility belt that sported several items ranging from simple canisters and even what appear to be two knives. I was inspired by this old manga from the pre-Quirk era. One of the antagonists had an ability that allowed him to control fire. Izuku mumbled with a smile. There's some minor alterations to the design, but it serves its purpose. Your costume was inspired by a villain? Jiro asked with a raised brow, surprised at the choice considering Midoriya seemed to be so heroes. Well, yeah. I just thought the designs of these enemies were really cool. They were all pretty similar and were heavily influenced by German culture, which now that I'm saying out loud sounds kind of bad. He ended his words with a grimace. History is written so it's not repeated. Momo quoted simply, I think your choice of design is unique. Yao Momo is right. Mina piped up with a grin. I think it's pretty cool. Thanks. Izuku responded with a smile. Any further talking between the students was interrupted as All Might clapped his hands, nearly producing a shockwave with his strength. All right, you zygotes, listen up closely. Today's foundational hero studies will be a simple one. A heroes versus villains macaron, if you will. He gestured towards a makeshift city behind him, in particular to a multiple-story building. Within this building there will be a faux bomb that the villains will be protecting. The hero's job is to disable it without causing major collateral damage. The prickly boy with glasses, who is currently in an entire robotic suit of armor, raised his hand. All Might then pointed at him a moment later. Sir, are we going to choose our partners for this? If so, what is the minimum requirement for a team? Furthermore, are we timed? And in part, how is a winner achieved? Izuku rose an eyebrow, wondering why the guy was making weird robot arm chops while he spoke. That is a lot of questions, All Might stated with a raised brow. However, I love the enthusiasm. In order to know, you will be not choosing your partners. It will be a simple 2v2 activity. Yes, you will be timed 5 minutes on the clock. A winner will be achieved if the hero team manages to either A. Capture the bomb, B. Capture both villains using their capture tape, and or C. If the timer runs out, the villains win by default. Then how are our teammates being chosen, All Might? One of the girls asked. Izuku idly recalled her name being Tsuyu Azui. All Might made a dramatic pose as he spoke, loudly. Ha ha! With the most surefire way that's bound to never fail. He reached behind his back slowly, garnering the students' attention and building suspense before revealing a hat. With this hat, there was silence for a few seconds. Wow, All Might. Next activity, we can draw straws. Mina quipped with a large grin, causing a few of the students to laugh. I'm glad you agree, Miss Ishido. The buff and burly man responded, easily catching the joking tone of his student. I sure love a good crowd. Mina's grin only grew bigger. At least All Might didn't mind a few jokes. The number one hero then passed the hat around to the class, allowing them to grab a single piece of paper. When the hat had been fully passed around, the man then called out for the first team to state their names and affiliations. Villain Katsuki Bakugo. The blonde teen roared ferociously, eyes honing in on Izuku. Hero Tsuyu Azui. The frog-like girl commented flatly, shooting an unimpressed look towards her villain classmate. Villain Ejiro Kirishima. Oh man, that's not manly at all. A redhead teen groaned to himself, resembling a rather old hero that Izuku recognized as Crimson Riot. Silence reigned for several seconds as the last student had yet to speak. Each of the students glanced around at one another before someone finally spoke. Hero Izuku Midoriya. The fire quirk user stated blankly, staring directly into Bakugo's eyes with distaste painted along his features. Ha ha ha. We have our first matches, and I'm sure it's going to be a doozy. Remember heroes and villains. Quirk usage is allowed. However, if I deem that the match is over, then it is over. Do all parties understand? The aforementioned students all nodded their heads, with Izuku and Bakugo just staring each other down with hate in their eyes. Then each team has 10 minutes to plan. Remember, go beyond. Plus Ultra. Izuku took a calming breath as he resisted the urge to scratch at his palms. He could feel the fire licking at the tips of his fingers, wishing to be released and used. He was finally getting his chance to knock Bakugo off that delusional mountain of arrogance and superiority. Are you okay, Midoriya-chan? Azui asked bluntly, head tilting as she stared at her teammate. Izuku blinked as he registered the question before glancing towards the girl. A blush spread across his features as he noticed how skin-tight the girl's costume was. What the heck was with the support class making the costumes so tight? Well, Bakugo and I have bad history. He paused for a moment as he glanced towards the girl, noticing that she was giving him her full attention. I'm sure you saw what happened at the end of class yesterday. Bakugo's always been a bully, and I was one of the kids that grew up with him. I was targeted relentlessly, and by the time I reached middle school, I had had enough and started fighting back. Bakugo thinks he can just be a hero by picking fights with villains and beating them up. Izuku shook his head with a sneer. The guy wouldn't know what a hero was if it knocked him out. So today I'm going to show him much I held back in Aldera. Azui was silent for a few moments before tilting her head and tapping her chin. I don't think fighting fire with fire is the solution, Midoriya-chan. It isn't. Izuku answered back simply, knowing how hypocritical he was being. But how else should I be dealing with the situation, Azui-san? If I don't fight back, Bakugo just comes at me harder. If I do fight back, subsequently putting him in the mud, then he may have an epiphany. The frog-like girl only stared at Izuku for a moment or two, tongue hanging out of her mouth. Aren't you the one who wants to be a hero because it's the right thing to do, Midoriya-chan? She asked in a simple manner. If you look at it from my perspective, you're only using this event as a way to settle pre-existing issues you've had with a childhood bully. Is this really the time where something like that needs to be settled, Midoriya-chan? You want to be a hero so that other people are inspired to walk in your footsteps. Who cares what Bakugo thinks, and why should it matter so much? You have a bigger goal in life than something as small as this. Her words stung. They burrowed deep into his chest, stabbing at him. They frustrated him, angered him. It wasn't fair to him. Bakugo was someone who needed to be outdone before his attitude hurt people. Why couldn't anyone see that? They didn't know him like he did. They didn't know the dangers his stupid quirk could dish out. They didn't know how cruel and uncaring he... Quite suddenly it hit him. They didn't. No, it made so much sense. Of course they wouldn't know. How could they? Aizawa-sensei had spoken of some of the history they shared, but it was incredibly clear that they lacked a good chunk of the happenings at Aldera. Why would their teachers be privy to such private information? They were just random kids wanting to be heroes for whatever reason. Childhood drama and beef wasn't their priority. Izuku wanted to punch something. No, he wanted to burn something. But he wouldn't. Not now. Not here. He wouldn't give in to these emotions. That's what Bakugo would want for him, to stoop to his level. Izuku refused to be like Bakugo. So, a plan began to form. With a clear mind, Izuku thanked Azui, who insisted on being called Tsu, and proceeded to step-by-step navigate the situation at hand. Okay, Tsu-san. He glanced over at the girl, smiling when she dipped her head with a tiny smile. Bakugo is going to come directly at me. There's no preventing that. He hates me, and it is what it is. He's likely going to ignore his villain partner, so I assume that Kirishima-san will be defending the bomb whether he likes it or not. He paused for a moment as he stared at a visual map of the building created in his head. The building is 7 stories high, standard office design. There's likely dozens of office cubicles spread around in the main rooms. He glanced towards the girl, ignoring the spandex-like suit of her costume as she sat on all fours like a frog. What all can your quirk do, Tsu-san? I know you possess the abilities of a tree frog, but I can elongate my tongue to about 12 meters and carry about 50 kilograms with it. I'm capable of climbing top buildings and walls, and I can jump really high. Tsu tilted her head as she stared up at the building. My abilities will be hindered in this office. I won't have full range. Midoriya nodded his head for a moment before glancing towards the girl. Can you, I know that some types of tree frogs are capable of camouflaging themselves and can even store food and other necessities in their stomach cavities. Is that something you can also do? The frog-like girl only tilted her head cutely. You know a lot about frogs, Midoriya-chan. She possessed a tiny smile on her face as she spoke. I can store things in my stomach, but not any amount that's currently useful. My camouflage isn't the best and fails more so than not, but I can do it. Izuku nodded his head, cupping his chin as he stared at the ground. mumbling quietly as he formulated a plan. Susan is incredibly agile with her frog-like quirk. Kirishima possesses a hardening quirk to some degree that, well, hardens his body. He has a ton of defense, but he's not quick. He's probably physically stronger than Susan as well, but she doesn't need to actually fight him with her long tongue. She can actually easily and safely manage to touch the bomb without actually having to confront Kirishima-san in open combat. He began to pace in place, Tsuyu watching in amusement. Bakugo's an idiot. He's going to come directly at me, and nothing else is going to matter. I'm going to be forced to fight him whether I like it or not, and quite frankly, I'd love to put his smug face in the dirt, but I don't need to. All I have to do is go on the defensive and make certain that collateral damage is negated. How in the world am I going to negate explosives? Well, sounds like a problem for future Izuku. Tsuyu could only smile to herself as the boy continued to pace back and forth whilst mumbling his thoughts aloud. It was adorable. A couple of minutes passed by as Izuku snapped out of his mumbling rant, explaining in precise detail exactly what they would do. He was to scale the building while trying to maintain her camouflage, locate the bomb, and touch it without Kirishima ever knowing it. In the event that her camouflage was to fail and Kirishima was to notice her, she'd use her agility and quick thinking to bring her over to the bomb due to Kirishima's lack of mobility and secure it. Izuku, on the other hand, well, he just had to stall Bakugo, as if that wasn't going to be difficult. The explosive menace was only going to have eyes for him anyway. Heroes, your timer starts now. Good luck. All Might's voice boomed from one of the many intercoms in the area. Izuku couldn't deny the fact that he was looking forward to this, to some degree, to finally show Bakugo how insignificant he really was. He'd humiliate him, but not in the way that he'd first had wanted to. As he idly scanned the lower floors, ultimately knowing that the bomb would be on the top floor, he mentally prepared himself. He'd show Bakugo what it meant to be an actual hero, someone who deserved the title because they cared about doing what was right. Wisps of flame began to copulate around Izuku's fingers as he stopped in one of the various hallways. He tilted his head to the side, listening quietly for any sign of Bakugo's presence. It wasn't hard to pinpoint it. Kaboom! DKU. An explosion emanated from one of the adjacent walls right next to Izuku, blasting him and sending him through one of the office cubicles. Or so Bakugo had originally thought. It wasn't until he felt a searing hot wave of pain crash against his jaw that he realized Izuku had managed to avoid the surprise attack. When the explosive user began to topple backwards, he flicked one of palms directly at Izuku, staring at him with vitriolic hate in his eyes. Die! A sphere of light formed near Bakugo's gauntlet-clad hand, and before the explosion could release, Bakugo felt his world turn upside down. The teen was airborne for a second before his back cratered the office building, causing him to wheeze in pain. You're far too predictable, Izuku muttered as he stood over the explosive boy. One of his feet was standing directly atop the boy's sternum, mashing him against the floor while holding his wrist, twisting the appendage painfully. White-hot fire began to lick at Izuku's other palm as he hovered it over Bakugo's head, a few foot from above him. Move and I'll burn you. Izuku threatened with harsh eyes, staring down at his old bully with anger in his eyes. Move. Please, try to move. Give me a reason, Bakugo. You think you can look down on me? The blonde teen roared angrily. DKU. Izuku ignored the flash of light that formed from the boy's quirk before channeling his quirk and allowing his flames to explode forward. A harsh explosion of fire detonated around the two boys, destroying a dozen or so cubicles and shaking the building. A large cloud of smoke wafted in the air as Bakugo covered his mouth and nose. The left side of his costume had been completely burned off, and his left arm was absolutely burning. The teen refused to look at it, knowing it'd only make him angrier. The angry teen grit his teeth, turning various times around the smoke while being unable to see. Bakugo growled angrily, swearing loudly as he caused small explosions to crackle from his hands. Where are you? DKU. A metallic crashing emanated from somewhere behind him, and Bakugo immediately rounded on it. He rose his palms towards the direction before causing an explosion. The smoke in the room began to finally vacate, having spread around at the action, allowing Bakugo to see more clearly. DKU. Show your FA. Whatever the boy was going to say was cut off as a metallic object crashed into the side of his head before combusting, exploding and causing a stream of liquid to cover the boy. It carried a specific smell to it. It was heavy, and Bakugo's eyes widened dramatically as he finally realized exactly what was covering his skin. Don't even think about it. Izuku warned from behind him, index finger poking the base of his neck. That canister was filled with gasoline. You even think about moving, and I torch you. Bakugo, he paused for a moment, relishing in the shaking form of his childhood bully. Your body can withstand the concussive force of your explosions, but you aren't equipped to deal with third-degree burns. I'd hate to cripple you for life because you decided that your pride was worth more than your body. You think you've won? Huh? DKU. Bakugo growled angrily, spittle flying from his mouth as he turned his head to gaze hatefully at the fire Quirk user. You think I'm going to sit here and let you? Yes, actually I do. Izuku answered simply, making it a point to push his index finger further into Bakugo's neck. Heroes kill villains. It's rare, but it certainly happens. Had you been an actual villain threatening the lives of innocent people, I'd have lit you up already. The blonde teen could only grit his teeth angrily. You're not a hero. You're worthless. It's all you'll ever be. Izuku sighed quietly to himself as he stared at the back of Bakugo's head. If I was a hateful person like you, I'd have scorched you in Aldera for everything you ever did to me when we were kids, but I had a realization I didn't want to be like you. I don't want to be like you. Whatever reason you had for tormenting me all through our childhood ends today. I'm done with your thing, Bakugo. You need to grow up and understand that life has consequences now. You think being a hero is just about fighting villains and causing explosions with your stupid quirk. Izuku spoke angrily, jabbing the boy's neck deeper with his finger. Being a hero is about doing what's right. It's about putting others before yourself. It's about saving people who can't fight for themselves. Everything you stand for spits on that, and I won't stand for it. The bomb has been secured. Hero team wins. At the announcement, Bakugo only grit his teeth in rage. His entire body shook at All Might's words. Had you actually decided to work with Kirishima, you'd have probably won against us. But no, you had to satisfy your stupid ego. Izuku scoffed to himself before removing his index finger from Bakugo's neck. He proceeded to turn his back on his old bully, uncaring of any kind of retaliation from the boy. Just know this, the green-haired teen continued as he walked away from the shaking blonde. I could have ended every single one of our little fights in Aldera whenever I wanted. You're not as strong as you think you are, Bakugo. With those parting words, Izuku left the room to make his way outside, leaving a stewing Bakugo to his rage. Izuku sighed quietly to himself as he sat near the corner of the gathering room, listening to the criticisms of his fight with Bakugo. It was even worse because Yaoyorozu-san was the one to pick apart everything that had happened, from the unnecessary collateral damage to the unneeded separation between teammates. Apparently the class could also hear everything being said from the students. That was even worse, as if his performance wasn't bad enough already. Nobody would understand. How could they? They hadn't grown up being bullied and pushed around for years like he had. It had been cathartic putting Bakugo in his place. Could have been done another way. Sure, but it wouldn't have meant much. His childhood bully was quite possibly the most stubborn individual in all of Japan. The only thing that'd get the boy to maybe change his ways was threat of expulsion. Izuku doubted that had come to fruition, but he'd love to be proven wrong. The teen just sighed quietly as he leaned his head against the wall, closing his eyes and ignoring his teammates' next matches. He didn't want to hear or see, for that matter, any more combat today. He loved quirks and all the various forms of applications to said quirks, but as of right now, he was tired and he wanted to go home. Midoriya-chan? The boy cracked an eye open, coming face to face with Sue. His eyes dropped down to her costume, spotting the scrapes and cuts along her costume. She had fought against Kirishima and had gotten a minor injury near her abdomen before finally capturing the bomb and securing their victory. He offered the girl a tired smile. Hey, Tsu, what's up? Always with the stutter. The frog-like girl made a cute ribbit noise before speaking. I think you did a really good job today. Your speech to Bakugo surprised a lot of the classroom. Izuku grimaced before turning his head towards the classroom, watching as the students all poured around the monitors. He would occasionally see some of them looking his way before turning their attention back onto the screens. I still allowed my grudge to get in the way of our match. If I did that as a pro hero, then people could have gotten hurt, he said with a quiet sigh. The frog girl made another cute ribbit noise before joining the boy sitting beside him. But isn't that why we're here? Izuku cast her a curious glance. Well, we aren't pro heroes, we're just a bunch of kids trying to become pro heroes. We've still got a lot to learn before we can call ourselves heroes. Sue explained with a small smile. I thought you did really well, all things considered. You even managed to put the end goal at the forefront of your mind despite your personal feelings about Bakugo. I think that's worthy of praise, Midoriya-chan. Izuku smiled at the girl's praise, appreciating the kind gesture. Thank you. Tsusana's eyes slowly swiveled to the large screen, watching as Ishido and Yaoyorozu confronted Kaminari. Their teamwork, Ishido and Yaoyorozu, was relatively good, all things considered. But that wasn't difficult to achieve considering that Yaoyorozu was a jack of all trades. She had such a flexible quirk that she'd be able to slot herself in any kind of situation and exceed. Ishido excelled in combat, and that wasn't really a surprise. Her quirk and application of it were stellar. Her agility, flexibility, swiftness, and quick thinking made her an annoying opponent to face off against, especially in close-quarters combat. Kaminari, well, he boasted a powerful quirk, that's for sure, but it was too dangerous to truly use in a team environment. Multiple times he'd risk harming Jiro in the process and end up nearly splattered by Ishido's acid. Jiro was doing most of the legwork, but it'd only be a matter of time before Yaoyorozu managed to craft a plan that'd have Ishido trapping Jiro where she couldn't move. Kaminari would be forced into a corner and would likely have to forfeit against Ishido and Yaoyorozu due to the fact his quirk was highly volatile. The guy didn't seem like the kind of type to sacrifice his allies to get the upper hand. It took a minute or so, but that exact thing happened. Yaoyorozu managed to create some kind of gun that spewed foam substance before quickly hardening and becoming like rock. She cornered Jiro, corralling the girl with the help of Ishido before ultimately pinning her against a wall with the foam substance and tying her earlobes together with capture tape. Kaminari had tried to control his electricity, but had hurt himself more than Yaoyorozu and Ishido. After the boy's subsequent mental meltdown, Yaoyorozu shot a cannonet at him, ensnaring him and allowing Ishido to tie the capture tape around him. And thus the heroes prevailed. Izuku smiled at his friend's victory, but felt kind of bad for Jiro. She had done the best she could with what she had. What's your quirk called, Midoriya-chan? Sue asked suddenly. Izuku jumped a little at the sudden question before replying. Oh, I call it psychoheliokinesis. It allows me to create and control fire. I just thought the name sounded cool. He finished with a nervous chuckle. I didn't get to see it in action at the entrance exams, but from what the other students said, it was pretty powerful and flashy. Sue tilted her head with a tiny rib bit. How'd you get so good with it? Izuku stammered for a moment before replying. Well, I've had a lot of practice. My mother used to hire tutors and personal trainers when I was younger, so I had a lot of influence and guidance from mentors growing up. Your mom must have paid a fortune, Sue idly croaked. Personal quirk trainers are very expensive. The fire quirk user glanced down at his gloved hands, conjuring a ball of fire. He proceeded to make it spin, altering the colors of the rapidly spinning orb of fire before abruptly snuffing it out. Yeah, they were. My mom spared no expense for me. She's one of the main reasons I push myself so hard. I want to make her proud. Sue smiled at the boy. I think your mom is already proud, Midoriya-chan. Izuku shared the girl's smile. Yeah, I think so too. Momo smiled to herself as she changed out of her hero costume, idly listening to the minor small talk between the rest of the girls in the class. Ishido was being her boisterous self, giggling and laughing as she traded gossip with Hagakure-san. Jiro sighed quietly as she slipped off her amp boots. I really got the short end of the stick today. Momo glanced at the girl as she began to redress herself. I think you did well, all things considered, Jiro-san. Most of our classmates would have struggled with Kaminari-san as their partners due to his quirk. I think you did well. I guess the petite girl responded with a quiet sigh. I wasn't able to touch Ashido cause she was so fast. And even when I did manage to corner her, you'd be there to get her out of the situation and force me back. I don't know, man. It's just kinda annoying. She griped, more so to herself out of frustration with today's events. Come on, Jiro. Ashido spoke with a giggle, wrapping an arm around the girl and pulling her close. I think you did pretty good. Your quirk isn't really suited for close combat like mine is. If one of your sound amp wave thingies had managed to hit me, I'm sure I'd have been out of commission. Jiro glanced towards the girl with an appreciative smile. Yeah, I guess her eyes dipped lower, smile turning flat. Can you, I don't know, maybe put on some clothes before trying to comfort me next time? I'd appreciate it. Ashido pulled away from the girl with a mischievous grin, revealing the girl to be in nothing more than a pair of white panties and a polka-dotted undergarments. What's wrong with giving a pep talk in your underwear? Everything. Jiro answered immediately, rolling her eyes with a growing smirk. Ashido-san, please put on some clothes. Momo spoke as she buttoned her uniform. Jiro-san, don't take today's loss to heart. We are all going to fail or underperform at some point. It is best to think of these experiences as opportunities of growth. What Yao Momo said. The acid quirk user spoke up, twirling in a circle, still refusing to properly dress herself. Ashido-san, please. Momo murmured as she looked away from the girl. I appreciate it, Yaoyorozu. Jiro replied with a small smile, feeling better about her loss despite the sting of not being able to show off her skills. I like that we finally got to. The purple-haired girl paused, head tilting to see the side as her earphone jacks caught a faint noise. They snaked around for a moment before elongating and moving towards one of the walls of the locker room, garnering the attention of all the girls in the room. What's up, Jiro? Ashido asked with a curious brow, finally deciding to properly dress herself. Jiro was quiet as she plugged one of her earphone jacks into the wall, remaining quiet. An annoyed expression bled to life on her face before she muttered angrily. That little weirdo Jiro stood to her feet, not removing her earphone jack, before moving along the wall, searching for something. Jiro-san? Momo questioned with furrowed eyebrows. Is something going on? Not for long. The girl grumbled while clenching her fist. That stupid pervert Mineta found a hole somewhere in the wall and is trying to look through it. I'm going to teach him a lesson. Jiro's other earphone jack wriggled like a snake as she crouched near the supposed hole in the wall. She was just about to stab it through the wall before widening her eyes and moving away from the wall and crying out a warning. Watch. Out. Izuku sighed quietly as he removed his costume, idly listening to the conversations from some of his male classmates. While his fight with Bakugo could have gone better, along with the subsequent criticism from one of his friends pertaining to his decisions on said fight, his day hadn't been that bad. He at least got to display a bit of his combat prowess and showcase his skills in a controlled environment. He was in the process of removing his vest when someone sat next to him and began speaking. So how'd you do it? Izuku blinked at the sudden question, turning towards the person who was speaking. Huh? He questioned Kaminari, staring at the boy nervously. How'd you manage to bag 3 hotties already? It's only the second day of school. The blonde teen cried as he pulled on his hair. What do you have that I lack? Izuku could only stammer in confusion at the boy's words. What was Kaminari-san even talking about? What 3 hotties? Wait, was he talking about Ashido, Jiro, and Yaoyorozu? What do you mean by that, Kaminari-san? Izuku questioned with furrowed eyebrows, his nervousness slowly disappearing. Come on, Midoriya, you know exactly what he means. Another voice spoke up from the opposite side of the locker room. How did you manage to get one of the hottest girls in class to hang all over you? Izuku glanced over towards Mineta, staring at the boy with furrowed brows. I have no idea what you're talking about. No girls are hanging all over me, Yaoyorozu-san. Ashido-san and Jiro-san are my F friends. Stupid stutters. They'd never go away. But still, his point stood. Come on, guys, Kirishima piped up with a concerned expression. Don't talk about the girls like that. It ain't manly. Manly? Mineta cried incredulously. Have you seen the curves on Yaoyorozu? She'd make a man out of anyone. Izuku felt something off. His face scrunched up in annoyance, and he felt embers burn in his chest. He'd only feel like this when dealing with Bakugo. Why were Mineta's words bothering him? Mineta-san. Izuku spoke quietly. Don't talk about Yaoyorozu-san like that. Mineta, oblivious to the boy's tone, did not. Share the secrets, Midoriya. It's gotta be your quirk you're not that good looking to attract two beauties like Yaoyorozu and Ishido. Izuku's fists clenched tightly, embers of flame slowly forming around his hands. Kaminari could feel the heat from Midoriya's quirk, eyes glancing down towards the boy's fist. His lips parted for a moment before he slowly scooted away from the fire quirk user. Hey, Mineta, maybe you should tone it down a bit. Kaminari might not be the smartest guy in the room, but he knew danger when he saw it. Midoriya wasn't a pushover. The guy may be slightly awkward and nervous most of the time, but he wasn't someone to mess around with. No one could ignore the boys' entrance exam feats and the hero versus villains mock-up test. The guy knew how to use his quirk and took out one of the heavier hitters in the class with relative ease. Short story? Don't mess with Midoriya. Don't be a stick in the mud, Kaminari. The short teen replied, waving the boys' warning off. Mineta's eyes roamed along the wall for a moment before his eyes widened. Guys, check it out. It seemed our upper classmates blessed us. The diminutive pervert pointed towards a relatively small hole in the wall. It's a hole with direct line of sight into the girls' locker room. Hey man, that's not manly at all. Kirishima spoke up with a frown, slowly standing to his feet. Don't go looking through that. Izuku's fists only clenched tighter, and in response, Kaminari scooted even further away. Dude, maybe we should cover it up? It's not that's not cool. Kaminari suggested nervously, briefly glancing towards Izuku. Mineta ignored the two teens as he crouched near the hole. What gloriousness will we see today? I can see it now. Yaoyorozu's perfect curves and wide hips. The boy giggled to himself before slowly leaning his head down to gaze through the hole. Most of the other boys in the locker room frowned at the boy's tone, even a few of them actually getting up to move Mineta from spying on the girls in their class. They didn't have to in the end. Izuku propelled himself forward using his flames, reaching Mineta before grabbing the boy by the back of his head and slamming his face into the wall, shaking the locker room from the sheer force. The fire user began to conjure flames along his arm, slowly twirling down his skin before wrapping around his wrist, licking dangerously at the side of Mineta's face. What'd I just say? Izuku questioned quietly, staring down at Mineta with a fierce glare. Don't talk about Yaoyorozu-san like that. He proceeded to exert pressure on Mineta's head, pushing the boy's head deeper into the now cracked wall. Mineta cried out in pain, clenching his eyes shut as he apologized. I'm sorry. I won't say anything about Yaoyorozu anymore. I swear. Izuku's flames started to swirl around his arm, dancing in the air and wriggling around Mineta's head. I swear. Uncle. Izuku pursed his lips as he stared down at Mineta. He was silent for several seconds, allowing the boy to feel the heat of his flames for a moment or two. He idly entertained the thought of just allowing them to. Izuku felt a hand lay itself atop his flaming arm, slowly snuffing out the flames. He blinked at the hand in surprise before noticing that a stream of steam was emanating from the area. Don't. He isn't worth it, Midoriya. Green eyes snapped to the stoic voice, staring into a pair of heterochromatic eyes. What? Todoroki? Shoto Todoroki stared into Izuku's eyes, stoically meeting the boy's frustrated gaze as he began to apply a thin sheen of ice along the boy's arm. He's not worth it, Midoriya. The fire and ice user stated once again. Izuku was quiet for a moment before ultimately recalling his flames and letting go of Mineta. He stared down at the boy for a moment before shaking his head with an annoyed growl and leaving the locker room, taking his backpack with him. Thank you, Todoroki. Thank you. The diminutive pervert groveled at the dual-hair-colored teen. Todoroki stared down at the boy for a moment before shaking his head and following in Midoriya's footsteps. Don't thank me, be better. The rest of the boys remained silent at that. not really sure how to react to what had just happened, though they all shared one common thought in their heads. Don't mess with Midoriya. The girls in the locker room slightly jumped as they felt a particularly powerful force slam into the wall. They heard a few voices talking, mumbled as they were before the other side. Eventually went quiet. Wojiro mumbled with a blush. Midoriya is kind of scary. A care to fill us in, Jiro? Mina asked curiously. Problem child. Aizawa sensei. There was a moment's silence following Izuku's acknowledgement of his homeroom teacher. The pro hero released a tired sigh as he glanced at the clock on his desk. It was well after school hours, nearly an hour and a half or so, before he had been called in by Principal Nizu regarding a minor scuffle between some of his students. He just wanted to go home. It was only the second day. Tell me, problem child, why did you Eraserhead pause for a moment, eyes glancing to the disciplinary report upon his desk? Slam Mineta's head against the wall while using your quirk? Izuku glanced away from his homeroom teacher before sighing quietly. He was trying to peep into the girls' locker room. Aizawa stared down at the fire quirk user for a moment before reaching for his mug of coffee. He sipped on the beverage for a moment, staring down at his students silently. He already knew that. He knew everything about the situation. This was just a formality due to his position as the boys' homeroom teacher. You are aware that regardless of good intentions or not, quirk usage on classmates and faculty of that magnitude are forbidden and punishable, yes? Aizawa droned quietly, not wishing to relay the information, but knowing that he needed to do so. Hi, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku mumbled quietly, staring down at his lap. Aizawa nodded his head before speaking. This is your first and only warning, Midoriya. There won't be a next time. Do not allow your emotions to control you. They're strong, yes, but they can also ruin your life and the lives of others. Make no mistake, though, Mineta will receive punishment for this. You, on the other hand, are being given a free pass. Midoriya furrowed his eyebrows. Sensei, Yudata High has a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to harassment. Any and all allegations are taken with the utmost seriousness and are investigated thoroughly. This school is prestigious for many reasons, and the faculty here are promoted to supporting the well-being of their students. Bullying, harassment, or not included, are taken incredibly serious here. I understand, Aizawa-sensei. The teen spoke quietly, bowing his head towards his mentor. Remember what I told you, Midoriya. If you have issues with your classmates, then I encourage you to come to me with them. I understand how frustrating it can be when witnessing your fellow classmates performing actions that you don't approve of. However, you cannot solve them yourself. It isn't your place to take action. Let us know. I understand, Aizawa-sensei. Izuku bowed his head once more. I apologize for causing unnecessary issues. Just don't do it again, problem child. Aizawa spoke tiredly. Now go home. We have a big day tomorrow. Make sure to get plenty of rest. The fire quirk user nodded his head, thanked his homeroom teacher, and grabbed his backpack while leaving the room. The pro hero sat quietly as he stared down at the disciplinary form on his desk. He stared down at the parchment for a moment or two before he proceeded to rip the form up, tearing it into tiny pieces and throwing it away in the trash. You're going to cause me so many headaches, Midoriya. Izuku sighed quietly to himself as he slowly walked through the campus of UA. Why had he gotten so angry at Mineta? He had outright assaulted the boy. Sure, the kid was a shameless pervert and kind of annoying, but that didn't mean he deserved to get torched by his quirk. He had gotten so angry hearing the boy talk about Yaoyorozu and Mina like that. Yes, they were pretty, but they weren't objects that was incredibly demeaning to them on a humane level. It showed that Mineta possessed a lack of maturity and care for others, especially those of the female gender. Midoriya sucked his teeth in annoyance. He could feel his flames itching beneath his skin, wanting to release and burn. No. He needed to be calm. Like Aizawa-sensei had said, he needed to control his emotions. Did you get in trouble? Midoriya physically jumped at the voice, having not expected it in the slightest. His head snapped towards the voice, recognizing the person who it belonged to. T. Todoroki, he exclaimed in surprise, trying to calm his rapidly beating heart. What are you still doing here? The scarred teen blinked at the question. Any excuse that allows me to stay away from home, I'll take. He explained shortly. Did you get in trouble? Midoriya shook his head as he spoke. No, just a warning. The dual-hair-colored teen merely nodded his head at the answer, somewhat expecting it considering the things his father told him about the school. Why did you stop me, Todoroki-san? The fire and ice quirk user was silent for a moment, debating what he wished to say. As he spoke, he began to walk towards the security gate with Izuku following after him. I recognize that look in your eye. Todoroki spoke simply. Nothing good ever comes from it. Izuku was quiet before staring at the palm of his right hand. I don't know what happened, I just got so angry. Todoroki merely shrugged his shoulders. It's a natural response. Minato was trying to look at your girlfriend. No one can blame you for getting angry. Izuku nearly tripped at the boy's words. Girlfriend? Yaoyorozu. Wait. Izuku spoke with a huge blush, frantically waving his arms back and forth. Why Yaoyorozu-san and I aren't dating? The fire and ice user glanced at Midoriya with a slightly confused expression. Oh, I apologize. I thought you two were romantically involved. We're just friends. Izuku insisted nervously. I understand. Todoroki mumbled quietly. Then you must be with Ishido? Once again, Izuku nearly tripped at the boy's insinuation. No, not Ishido either. Todoroki-san. Not Ishido-san either. Just friends. He corrected one again. Todoroki glanced towards Izuku with a confused expression. Then Jiro? He proposed. Friends. Izuku squeaked with a blush. The dual-hair-colored teen was silent for a moment before making a quiet humming noise. It appears I have misread the situation. Do you only wish to be friends with them? Or do you want to date them? Todoroki-san. Izuku cried out in shock, cheeks practically blazing like the quirk he wielded. What are you even saying? Todoroki himself just seemed confused at Midoriya's shock. What? Am I wrong? I was under the assumption that you were interested in them. Them? As in multiple? Like multiple girlfriends? What are you even suggesting, Todoroki-san? Todoroki shrugged his shoulders. You can have multiple girlfriends, can't you? What's wrong with that? Is there some kind of law stating otherwise? Well, no, there wasn't a law preventing the act of having multiple partners, but it was more so the ethicality of it. Or rather, the morality of said subject. Well, Izuku wouldn't necessarily mind having a girlfriend. Emphasis on a girlfriend. Singular. One. But having multiple. He couldn't even fathom how that'd work. On top of the fact that Todoroki was suggesting that he could have Yaoyorozu, Ishido, and Jiro as girlfriends. What would be nice? Izuku rapidly shook his head to clear of his thoughts about that subject. Well, there's nothing preventing someone from having multiple partners, but there's other stipulations and circumstances that goes into something like that, moral and ethical beliefs notwithstanding. He explained with a mumble. Todoroki merely shrugged his shoulders. I don't see the big issue. If you like multiple people, what is the issue with pursuing them? Midoriya mumbled to himself, rubbing his cheeks as he thought about how to answer his classmates. It didn't appear that Todoroki was messing around with him. The fire and ice user was relatively blunt all things considered, and he had a very stoic personality. Jokes and pranks didn't really fit his forte. Well, it's not that there are really issues with the idea of doing so, but it's complicated. Most people today are very traditional. They want to find love with one person. He explained as best as he could with the limited knowledge he possessed. Todoroki tilted his head at the answer. Why limit yourself to only one partner? Limit yourself. Was this like a competition to Todoroki? Izuku wanted to laugh at the incredulity of it all. They're not limiting themselves, Todoroki. San, it's just polyamory isn't something that's very popular these days. It doesn't help that all parties involved have to come to a compromise. Emotions can be volatile, and when it comes to love, well, it's probably the most unpredictable one. The scarred teen nodded his head at Izuku's words. Interesting, do you have more than two parents, Midoriya? What? More than two? Oh, well, no. Izuku mumbled while scratching at the back of his neck. I have a mother and a father, but well, they're divorced. I live alone with my mom. I apologize if I brought up negative memories. The stoic teen apologized, bowing his head. When Izuku nervously waved him off, Todoroki continued. I do. Midoriya blinked at the question before furrowing his eyebrows. You have multiple parents? Todoroki offered a simple nod. I have one father and 3 mothers. Endeavor had multiple wives? Since when? How had this knowledge not been public? What? Izuku was completely floored. Endeavor has 3 wives? The fire quirk user exclaimed in shock. Todoroki merely nodded once more. How did he manage to keep this a secret? Todoroki merely shrugged his shoulders. He has a good PR team. That or my mothers are good at hiding. Izuku just couldn't believe what he was hearing. It just didn't seem to make sense at all. Why would Endeavor have 3 wives in the first place? Did he love all 3 of them equally? How could you love all 3 equally? That is wow. Izuku merely mumbled, shell-shocked at the discovery. The 2 teens then descended into silence, walking side by side as they finally neared the security gate. They were nearly about to reach it before witnessing a peculiar interaction. Yaoyorozu was talking to an incredibly tall and slender man with blonde hair. The guy looked like he was skin and bones, as if a simple breeze would roll him over. Yaoyorozu-san? Izuku called out curiously, surprised to see the girl physically jump in surprise. She whirled on her heels, eyes widening to saucers as she stared at her 2 classmates. You okay? He asked in concern at her reaction. The creation Quirk user stammered for a few seconds as she clasped her hands behind her back. Yes, of course. Why wouldn't I be? I'm fine, very fine. Smooth. Toshinori Yagi mentally mused, merely smirking as his protege made a fool of herself. He coughed to compose himself, spewing blood as he did so. He ignored the concerned gazes from the 2 boys before speaking. Greetings, young ones. I assume you're classmates of young Yaoyorozu-chan? The 2 boys nodded their head at the question, watching as their female classmate began to calm down and compose herself. Ha! The frail man laughed as he placed a gentle hand atop Momo's shoulder. It is always nice to see such young ones caring for the well-being of their classmates and friends. Well, I'll be on my way then. I was merely wishing luck to young Yaoyorozu-chan in her future as a hero. She has great potential. The girl blushed at the man's praise. Goodbye, young men. The blond man smiled as he began to walk away, leaving the teens alone with one another. Todoroki merely offered the man a single nod as he departed. Izuku, on the other hand, he seemed so familiar. Izuku mumbled with furrowed brows, wondering why that strange man was so familiar. It's like I know him. His words only caused Yaoyorozu to grow nervous. So why are you 2 still here? I thought you'd have both been gone by now, Yaoyorozu asked as she tried to calm her raging heart. Izuku glanced at Todoroki for a moment, blushing in embarrassment at the questions he'd been asked earlier. Well, I had to have a talk with Aizawa-sensei about earlier today. Todoroki was just waiting for me, I guess. The scarred teen merely offered a nod at the boy's words. So, who is that, Yaoyorozu-san? You seemed very close with him. Yaoyorozu sported a dash of pink on her cheeks as she clasped her hands behind her back. That was Toshinori Yagi. He's a mentor of mine. I met him several years ago before middle school and was in need of guidance with my Quirk. Yagi-san has been my mentor ever since. Izuku donned a small smile at the girl's words. It seemed Yaoyorozu was very fond of Yagi. Considering he's been her mentor for the past 4 years, must have meant that the man was extremely good at his job. That's nice, Yaoyorozu-san. Izuku complimented with a smile. I appreciate your words, Midoriya-san. She replied with a small smile. Yaoyorozu, I want to apologize. Todoroki suddenly spoke, bringing attention to himself. When Yaoyorozu gave him a curious glance, he continued. I thought that you and Midoriya were dating and made assumptions. I apologize. Both Izuku and Yaoyorozu proceeded to blush at the boy's words. Todoroki-san, Izuku hissed in embarrassment as he covered his face while shaking his head. Boyfriend, the curvy girl squeaked. Midoriya-san and I? Her cheeks somehow got even redder as she placed her hand upon her cheeks, shaking her head side to side in embarrassment. Todoroki merely blinked at the reactions of the 2 teens. What? Was it something I said? Izuku idly scrolled through his phone on his morning commute to U.High. He had received a few compliments from some people regarding his school that had left him feeling all warm inside. Embarrassed as well, but warm. He then stepped off the train, where he coincidentally met up with one of his other classmates, one that he didn't really know all too well. Midoriya-san. A round-faced girl waved as she spotted him, picking up her pace to catch up with the boy. The green-haired fire user turned around, spotting the girl, calling his name, and slowing to a stop. He tried to curb his nervousness, greeting her as she finally caught up. Hiraraka-san, right? Izuku questioned with a nervous smile. The girl offered the boy a polite nod as she responded. Hi, and you're Izuku Midoriya, right? The nervous boy granted the girl a small nod, smiling in amusement as she pumped her fist. You fought against that loud guy who could make explosions, right? Bakubakugo or something? She asked curiously. Izuku's smile became decidedly more strained, but he nodded all the same. Correct. Uraraka was slightly oblivious to the boy's strained smile. Yeah, that guy's really loud. And rude. She placed an index finger on her cheek as she pursed her lips. Come to think about it, it's kind of fitting really what with his quirk and all. Izuku merely offered a simple nod of the head. I agree. The bubbly girl glanced towards the normally nervous boy before grimacing. Oh, I forgot you two have bad history. Izuku merely sighed quietly as he shook his head. Can't really keep it a secret anymore. Yeah, we weren't friends. Uraraka nodded her head with a frown. He kept calling you something Deku? Or something like that. What does that mean? The green-haired teen rolled his eyes. It means useless. He gave me that nickname when we were kids growing up because he refused to accept my help when he needed it. The girl frowned at his words. Sounds like a bully. That's because he is. Izuku muttered quietly. Dang, the girl mumbled as she glanced towards the green-haired boy. I'm sorry for bringing it up. It's fine. Izuku waved off the girl's apology with ease. Just gonna have to get used to it. Bakugo and I don't like each other, and it isn't really a secret. However, like I said yesterday, I'm done putting up with Bakugo's CRP. He needs to grow up. If he wants to spend his hero training trying to bring me down, then so be it. It's not going to work. My dream is bigger than him. Uraraka grinned at the boy as she replied. That's the spirit. The normally nervous teen offered the girl a timid smile. Went off on a rant there, huh? You do seem to like your speeches. She responded with a giggle. Izuku gave a soft chuckle at the girl's words before abruptly slowing down and staring at the spectacle occurring in front of High. There seemed to be dozens of news reporters and journalists hounding the security gate. Whoa, Uraraka mumbled as she stared at the large crowd. Why are there so many reporters? Probably because of All Might, Izuku mumbled as he continued towards the school. All Might doesn't do interviews anymore. It's actually pretty rare to see him out and about these days. As the two teens got closer, they were immediately hounded by the reporters. Dozens of questions assaulted them, most of which centered around All Might and if they were being taught by him. We're just general ed students, Uraraka mumbled, swerving her way through the journalists and reporters. I haven't even seen All Might. She wasn't really convincing, but at least it kept the hounds at bay, allowing Izuku to coast alongside her into the school. As the teens stepped through the gates, one of the reporters tried to follow. Before the man could even step his foot through, a loud alarm began to blare before the security gates slammed shut, preventing access into the school. Wow, that was awful. Uraraka mumbled as she continued, walking alongside Midoriya. The boy merely nodded his head at her words, remaining silent. Uraraka was about to speak once more before being cut off by a familiar voice. Midori-kun, Ashido yelled out, arms waving frantically with a large grin as she made her way towards their direction, practically sprinting towards them. Her boisterous cry caused a small, but embarrassed smile to form on Izuku's face. He waved back at the girl who showed no signs of stopping. Ashido-san. Hey, how are you? Izuku greeted before being practically bowled over by the girl. He landed on the ground with quiet oomph, feeling a weight upon his lap. Midori-kun, Ashido yelled out once more, staring down at the teen without a care in the world. What you up to? She asked with a large grin. From his position on the floor, Izuku blushed a deep red. Well, I'm currently on the floor. His words caused the pink-skinned girl to giggle. Why did you jump on me, Ashido-san? Is there something wrong with jumping on your friends? She asked with an innocent smile. There is when you're wearing a skirt, Izuku mumbled in an embarrassed manner. The boisterous girl glanced down at the position she was in before tilting her head. Embarrassed you'll see something you like? She teased with a giggle. It had the intended effect on Izuku, which only made Mina laugh harder. She jumped back to her feet before offering her hand to Midoriya with a smile. The boy accepted it with an embarrassed smile, cheeks blazing. Uraraka, right? Mina asked as she turned her attention towards the gravity manipulator. Yeah, and you're a Shido, right? Mina merely nodded her head, clashing her hands behind her back with a small smile. It was not a nice smile. What's you doing with Midori-kun? Uraraka blinked at the, in her opinion, odd question. Why did Mina's smile seem fake? It was almost as if the girl was slightly annoyed. Well, I saw him getting off his train and decided to talk with him on our way to school. She answered, slightly taken aback by the feeling she was getting from Mina. She was feeling slightly uncomfortable and couldn't really explain why. The acid-flinging Quirk user nodded her head before turning towards Izuku and speaking. Adorable. That single word somehow made Uraraka even more uncomfortable. What the heck was going on? We should get going. Izuku offered nervously, spotting Jiro and Yaoyorozu waving their way a few meters up ahead. Come on, Ishido. Sani turned towards Uraraka. Smile. It was nice meeting you, Uraraka-san. After his words, the boy began to walk away, intending on greeting Yaoyorozu and Jiro. Mina allowed the boy to walk ahead of her before turning her attention on Uraraka. The girl's eyes seemed to flash dangerously, and her boisterous smile flattened, lips thinning into a fine line. Adorable, Mina said once more, staring directly into Uraraka's eyes. Just adorable. Then she was off, skipping merrily towards her friend group while calling out their names with a large smile. Uraraka did not enjoy what had just happened. In fact, she didn't even know what had happened. Why did Mina seem so hostile? The girl was usually so joyful and carefree. What did she do? Before we do anything today, Aizawa droned on tiredly, practically falling over his desk due to his sleepiness. You'll be picking a class representative and a vice president. Why? Because for future events and scenarios where you're lacking the guidance of a teacher, your class representative will be the one you go to. In the event that your class representative is out of commission for whatever reason, then the vice president will be the one you go to. Now, in the case of extreme emergencies, a third individual can be chosen in case there's ever a time where both the class rep and the vice president are both unable to attend to the class needs. But we'll worry about that if it ever actually happens, so go ahead and select your two representatives. The classroom then erupted into semi-controlled chaos, with most of the students boisterously declaring their wishes of being the class representative. Izuku merely allowed the class to bicker with one another about who had the necessary qualifications of being fit for leadership. He sneaked a glimpse at Yaoyorozu, watching as the girl mimicked his own actions. She herself didn't seem to be too interested in the discourse, but it was clear that she was listening to the class. Eventually, something had to give. Would it not make the most sense to pick our representative based off the qualities that a pro-hero embodies? Todoroki finally questioned, slicing through the chattering of his classmates. We should vote democratically. Izuku smiled at Todoroki's words. I agree with Todoroki-san. We should all write down who we believe embodies what it means to be a true hero and go on from there. However, no voting for yourself, that'd be unfair, and it'll only bloat the voting pool. Mina pointed towards her friend as she spoke. Midori-kun's got the right idea. And so, everyone went on to write who they believed to embody a true pro-hero. The results were not surprising. Well, at least to the entire class aside from one person. That person being Izuku himself. 11 votes. He squawked in disbelief. More than half of you voted for me. Yaoyorozu spoke up with a smile, amused at her friend's surprise. It makes sense your speech the other day was very genuine and earnest. Even All Might himself acknowledged your words. And then your fight with Bakugo, and I think everyone here believes you're more than qualified. Or well, at least most of us, she mumbled while rolling her eyes, knowing that Bakugo himself was the sole exception, and possibly Mineta due to what had happened between them. Izuku stared at the results, still surprised to see he had been voted for by over half the class. Yaoyorozu herself got 5 votes, Ida got 3 votes, and Bakugo had 1 vote. The result made him roll his eyes. He more than likely still voted for himself, as if anyone believed that Bakugo embodied what a true hero was. Well, I guess I'm the class representative. Izuku muttered with a nervous smile. I appreciate the votes. Now that that's settled, please avoid bothering me and do whatever it is that you kids do when alone. Aizawa spoke from his position on the floor, rolled up in his sleeping bag. Except for having it. It's not allowed. He closed his eyes with a smirk, listening to some of the students squawk in embarrassment. Izuku placed his lunch tray down beside Yaoyorozu, taking the seat next to her while greeting her. Hey, Yaoyorozu-san. Midoriya-san. The wealthy girl greeted politely with a smile. How does it feel to be the class rep? A bit of pink dusted his cheeks at her question. Well, I feel honored that my classmates think so highly of me, even after what happened with Mineta-san yesterday. Momo hummed to herself as she began to eat her enormous plate of food. I don't necessarily blame you for your actions. While yes, you could have handled the situation better, I find it incredibly difficult to believe that Mineta-san would learn from just a verbal scolding. I appreciate that you and some of the other boys were willing to stick up for us. It's cool to know that a majority of the guys aren't weirdos like Mineta. Jiro piped up with a smile, making herself known as she sat down with her own lunch. Jiro told us everything that happened. Mina followed up, sitting beside the purple-haired girl. I thought it was pretty hot. She winked at the boy, following her words, giggling as a fierce blush spread across his features. Come on, dude. Jiro snorted with a smile as she nudged Mina's shoulder, chuckling at Midoriya's embarrassed expression. You're gonna break him again. Yaoyorozu smiled thinly at her friend's words. Adorable. The girl proceeded to then dig into her food, eating at a rapid pace, but still somehow managing to convey a sense of dignity and poise. Wow, Yao Momo, Mina mumbled as she stared at the mountain of food on the girl's plate. That's a lot of food, you can keep that down? Where does it even go? Midoriya rose an eyebrow himself at the sheer volume of food on the curvy girl's plate. I'm guessing it has something to do with your quirk. Momo dabbed her face with a napkin, cheeks a light pink as she spoke. You are correct, Midoriya-san. In order for me to utilize my quirk, I need to ingest large amounts of food to function as the battery. In order to create inorganic objects, my quirk uses my lipids and fat cells to create the item, so long as I know the molecular makeup of the item. Mina whistled in appreciation. Smart and gorgeous sheesh. Jiro burst out laughing at Mina's words. You did not just sheesh. How old are you? 52. Mina giggled at the girl's words. Sheesh. The girl even went so far as to place her index and middle finger upon her wrist, checking herself for a pulse while biting her bottom lip. Izuku and Momo giggled at the girl's goofy expression as Mina and Jiro began to laugh loudly. Out of nowhere, an alarm started blaring loudly, shocking the group and causing no small amount of chaos to ensue. What's going on? Mina asked frantically, watching as random students ran and panicked. The syllabus mentioned that alarms only go off inside the school if the perimeter's been breached. Izuku responded, yelling to be heard over the chaos. Come on, we need to get to our designated evacuation area. The 3 girls all followed after Midoriya, getting pushed around and shoved as they tried to evacuate from the cafeteria. In the midst of all the chaos, Jiro was separated from the group, getting boxed against a window and crying out in pain. The girl clenched her earphone jacks, gritting her teeth as all the yelling was causing her ears to overstimulate. She peeked an eye open, managing to catch a glimpse of the front gate before widening her eyes. It was the stupid reporters and journalists. They had managed to somehow get through. Jiro elbowed someone who pushed her against the window before trying to spot any of her friends. She managed to catch a glimpse of Uraraka, who was relatively close to her, before using her earphone jacks to grab a hold of the girl's wrist. The girl immediately rounded on the sensation, spotting the familiar ear-lobed quirk before pushing and shoving her way to the girl. Jiro-san, are you okay? she asked, yelled, as she noticed the girl clenching her earphone jacks tightly. It's loud, she cried in pain. We need to let them know it isn't serious. It's just the reporters from outside. Uraraka managed to catch a glimpse of the intruders before immediately touching her fingertips and floating upwards into the air. She desperately searched for one of her classmates, knowing that her voice alone wouldn't be enough to corral the crowd. Her eyes quickly spotted a head of messy green locks before she made her way over towards Izuku, catching his gaze quickly. He rose his hand into the air, seemingly aware of what she wanted to do. She touched the boy's hand a moment later, causing him to slowly float in the air. Izuku immediately began to channel his quirk, allowing his flames to burst from his palms, spiraling around him like a tornado. Hey, stop panicking, the boy roared loudly, channeling his flames and causing them to bellow outwards. The Udata students began to slowly calm down at the sight, finally allowing for some much-needed silence. It's just the reporters from outside. They managed to somehow get through the barrier. His face hardened, staring down at the students with disappointment. We're Udata High students. Act like it. What's wrong with all of you? Evacuate to your designated zones in an orderly fashion. Now go. After his words, the students began to slowly and calmly vacate the packed hallway. Izuku himself sighed quietly before snuffing out his flames and looking over at Uraraka. The girl gave him a small smile before touching her fingertips together, causing the two of them to slowly fall back down. Nice work, Midoriya. The girl complimented with a smile, as expected from our class rep. Izuku gave an embarrassed smile at the girl's words. It was nothing, Midori-kun. It was his only warning before barreled over by Mina. This was not the first time, and nor would it be the last time, that Izuku would get jumped on by Mina. Aizawa-sensei? Yes, problem child? Izuku made a face at that before asking his question. Is there a particular reason why we're not going to our foundational hero studies class? And why we're already in our hero costumes? Aizawa sighed to himself as he guided his class. Today's lesson will be a special one. Just follow me, and I'll explain it more in detail when we actually get there. Izuku nodded his head, glancing towards his friends and shrugging his shoulders. Their journey was relatively short as they stopped near one of the parking lots. A small bus was parked outside, its doors ajar. All right, get inside. Aizawa ordered simply. Everyone, get on in an orderly fashion. Ida ordered, chopping his arm like a robot. Who died and made you class rep? Mina snorted as she brushed past the prickly teen. Jiro chuckled quietly, following after the pink-skinned girl. Come on, man, ease up. It's just a bus ride. She too passed by the boy. Ida frowned at their words as the rest of the class followed their lead, passing by the boy without another word. Izuku merely patted the taller boy's shoulder, consoling the sulking boy without actually speaking. Yaoyorozu giggled at the boy's action as she followed her class representative when all the students filed on the bus. Aizawa ordered the driver to take off. Izuku sat next to Yaoyorozu, staring out the window in awe at how big Udata really was. It was one thing to read about it on the internet, but to see it in person, it was crazy just how much there actually was. It's surreal, isn't it, Midoriya-san? Momo asked with a smile, joining him in gazing out the window. Yeah, he answered with a smile. My whole life, I dreamt of being a hero to help people. It's surreal that I'm actually here. You deserve to be here, Midoriya-san, Momo stated, drawing the boy's gaze. You embody what a real hero should be. I'm slightly envious sometimes. Izuku noted that the girl seemed troubled, almost as if she was disappointed. But why? Yaoyorozu wanted to be a hero to help people as well. She had said so herself. She deserved to be here as well. Why would she be envious of him? He wouldn't get his answer as the bus finally came to a stop. Aizawa then woke up from his cat nap, ordering the students off the bus and having them stand near the entrance of a massive building with the letters USJ labeled on it. Universal Studios Japan. Kaminari exclaimed happily, causing Jiro to snort at his stupidity. No, Aizawa said simply, punching in a code that the students couldn't see and opening the massive doors that led into the building. The students were awed at the various terrain and different-looking environments within the gigantic building. Welcome to the unforeseen simulation joint. Aizawa greeted casually. Our first day, we ran multiple different tests in which you were ordered to utilize your quirk to your advantage. The second day, you were all pit against one another in combat, learning how dangerous your quirks can actually be in a combat scenario. Today, we are going to show you how to utilize your quirk for rescue operations. Allow me to take over, Aizawa. A muffled voice spoke out. It's 13. Urarika gushed at the astronaut-looking pro-hero. You're my favorite hero. The black hole manipulator chuckled in amusement. It seems I have a fan. She chuckled once more before continuing. As Aizawa was explaining exercises in which we place all of you in different environments, having you save and provide aid to your fellow classmates. As the students began to murmur between each other excitedly, Aizawa gazed around the area. 13, where's All Might? The woman held up her hand, signaling with 3 fingers as she spoke. He got caught up with some things. I'm not sure if he'll be here today. The words of the pro-heroes went over a lot of the students' heads. Mainly speaking, everyone. All except for one. Momo frowned at the words, clasping at her forearm nervously. Her eyes scanned over her classmates, spotting their slightly confused expressions. She sighed quietly to herself, staving off the discomfort at knowing that All Might had already used up a majority of his daily limit and power. Well, at least today couldn't get any worse. Aizawa-sensei, what's that? Izuku cried out in alarm, standing against the balcony that overlooked the main plaza. The man raced over to his student, taking note of the boy's concerned tone. His eyes widened dramatically at seeing what appeared to be a portal with several dozens of individuals walking through it. 13, the pro-hero exclaimed, tugging on his capture scarf and pulling his goggles over his eyes. Get the kids out of here. We're under attack by villains. Damn it, she shouldn't have said anything. It just got much worse. As 13 made to open the door to the building, a shadowy mist appeared, blocking her way. Hello, students of U.High. The mist seemed to grow smaller before taking the shape of what appeared to be a man dressed in a suit. The League of Villains is here today with a goal one that will tear down the foundation of the world as we know it. The students began to group up behind 13 as the villain spread his arms wide. We are here to kill All Might. So, this was the end of part 1 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.